Hello everyone. Today I will tell you 8 horror or disturbing stories from medicine's experiences, from medicine's submissions. Even at night. It happened in the very place I still live to this day. It's a very old apartment, but it's a very nice one. We have huge windows here and one of them faces the street in front of our building due to these windows. If you leave the curtains open, anyone walking past will see everything. So we make a habit of closing the curtains back. When this took place, we used to sleep with the window facing our heads. Basically, our bed was right in front of the window. I remember that on the night this took place, I was having a really tough time sleeping. It was probably due to the heat, maybe even some stress. I remember being really tired and unable to get to sleep. I was wide awake and I hated it. I think it was around AM when the following took place. I couldn't tell you the exact time, though I felt the wind blowing through small gap in the curtains. It was cooling my cheeks. It was nice. I then sat up and looked towards the window. It was supposed to be the height of summer. I lay back down in bed and glanced at my husband. He was sound asleep. Lucky I went back to trying to fall asleep. But then I felt as if something just touched the hairs on the top of my head. I thought to myself, quit being paranoid and just go to sleep. You're searching for reasons to stay awake. It did feel like something touched my head, though after a few moments I felt that cool, windy breeze flow all over me again, and I thought to myself once again, just ignore. It's your imagination. Just go to sleep. It felt like a rhythmic flow of air was pointed right at my head. I had to check the window again. I didn't want to go to sleep without checking. When I have sat up and turned to face the window, I saw something that horrified me. A hand was reaching in through the window. It was carefully positioned behind the corner of the curtain. The hand was slowly edging forward to open the curtain inwardly. I watched frozen in horror. I don't think I could have done anything else. The curtain opened inward and slowly revealed the shadow of a dark human face. The street light was against me, so I couldn't make out any features on the face. That, of course, was terrifying. Seeing that dark human head moving closer to the window was mind-altering, life-frightening. So terrifying that I let out the loudest involuntary scream of my life. As I screamed, I saw the face duck down and disappear. I say disappear because I don't know where that person ran off to. I was too busy screwing my eyes shut and raising my hands to protect myself. My husband jolts to life like he had just been zapped by one of those cardiac arrest defibrillator machines. He starts to panic and asks me what the hell is going on. I told him about the person in the face and the hand reaching in, and we closed the window and vowed never to sleep with it open again at night. We called the police and told them the situation. They said they would increase patrols in the area, but the damage was already done. I felt like the police wouldn't be able to do anything about that weirdo. One thing we did. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Was moved the bed away from the window. Just thinking back on that night, that air I was feeling could have been the person's breath or something. And oh God, when they touched my hair. What else were they gonna do if I was asleep that night? I wonder. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I'm just glad I couldn't sleep that night. I guess even now, when I remember that night, I can see that black silhouetted head and I'm reaching in it. It's blurred into my memories foreign. This happened when I was left home alone as a youngster one night. It was horrifying. I think the reason I was left home alone was probably due to my parents, both working late one night simultaneously. My family home was opposite a national highway. On one side it faced the sea. It's a very rural place, like literally in the middle of nowhere. That night I was watching something dumb on TV quite late. Whenever my parents were out late, they always told me to take myself to bed on time. But I never did. I just stayed up late that night. Like I say, I was watching some late night variety show in the living room. My cat was with me, being lovely and fluffy as usual. Suddenly I heard a knock at one of the windows of the living room. It came from the side of the house that faced the national highway. It sounded kind of deliberate. You know, kind of like this. It was kind of windy out that night, so I guessed that maybe a tree limb or something tapped the glass. I don't know. Out in the countryside you tend to hear all kinds of things late at night, and I guess you grow to live with them. I just kept right on watching TV without worrying about it. A few moments or so passed and I hear something else. This time it sounded as if the knocking came from another window in the room next to the lounge. I started to feel a little spooked. The first few pangs of fear. You know, but I'd let it go. I just kept watching TV. I knew that no one but me was in the house or around the house. Then I heard another series of knocks. This time they came from the front door. At this point, young though I was, I couldn't help but notice a pattern. A few windows had been knocked. It wasn't as if I was hearing the knocking from one continuous location. Something was wrong. I sat frozen to the sofa, considering whether to turn the volume up or down. One part of me wanted so much to ignore the knocking sounds, but the other pile of me screamed at me to listen, to turn off the TV and react. I turned down the volume, but not fully off. I didn't want to be plunged into silence. I wanted the safety of the voices on TV. The knocking continued. This time it sounded as if it came from the back door and then the kitchen window. At that point I realized that the knocks were sort of circling me, going around the house. These knocks were so light that each time I heard them, I doubted myself, but couldn't convince myself. The knocks then reached the sea-facing window of the lounge, and I guessed, if there was any method to the madness, that the knocks would likely stop after one full round of the house. However, I found that I was quickly proven wrong. I heard much louder and much more deliberate sounding knocks at the lounge window facing the highway. After a minute, maybe the same knocking sound at the same volume came from the window next to the lounge. I thought to myself instantly, it's a lap. Someone's doing a lap around our house, and their knocks get louder once they return to the place they started. Yeah, but at this point I wasn't convinced it was the wind anymore. I decided to anticipate the next knock and head to the front door. Our front door has a frosted glass panel so you can see in or out clearly. The knock came clearly at the front door, but I couldn't see anyone there. I looked outside the downstairs bathroom window, but again I couldn't see anyone. I heard a knock coming from the room next to the kitchen, and I knew that the knocks were once again moving. I was getting so scared now. I rushed back into the lounge. In the lounge I saw that my cat was looking agitated. I sat there wide-eyed, listening to the sound of the knocks slowly moving around the house. I was just frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. I felt as if it was probably a bad idea to stay in the living room. I picked up my cat and I planned to escape upstairs. There was one problem. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. The stairs were in view of the front door and one of the windows, so I needed to wait until the knocks were at the back door before I could run upstairs. As soon as I heard those knocks at the back door, I raced upstairs. I didn't even turn my bedroom lights on. I just held my cat tightly to my chest and strained my ears to listen for any noises. The knocking came again. It had completed its second round of the house and now was beginning its third. I decided to use the darkness of my bedroom as a vantage point. I looked out of the second floor window. My bedroom was directly above the lounge, so if someone was down there I should have been able to see them. But once again I couldn't. I heard knocking, but no one's there. I was on the verge of panic. Cat starts growling and hissing. I don't know if there was an extremely stealthy person out there or if I was dealing with something paranormal. I had the gut feeling that it was human, though the knocking was really loud. Now it was terrifying. I didn't know what I could do. The house phone was downstairs and I was way too freaked out to go back down there. Then something happened gradually. The knocks grew quieter and softer until they were barely audible. The cat began to calm down a little too. When my cat lay on my bed and closed her eyes, I knew that she didn't feel threatened anymore. I felt as if everything was all right. I decided to go and get ready for bed. I had learned my lesson about staying up too late. I was just about to leave my room and go and brush my teeth when I heard something. The knocking was back and it was louder than ever. It sounded as if every window in our house was being knocked at once, and the cat went mental full on, arched her back and her foot was standing on end. I had no idea what to do. I just crawled into bed and covered myself with my bedding. Like a coward, I was crying. I didn't know why someone was messing with our house like that. The banging was so loud it felt like the walls were shaking. I was mumbling out loud, something like, "Please leave us alone. I can't take it anymore." I don't know how long I was like that in bed, but before I knew it, the knocking sounded quieting down again and the front door was opening. I was terrified. Whoever was out there had managed to get in. But then, just as quickly as fear had overwhelmed me, relieved it, I heard the voices of my parents coming from the foot of the stairs. That kind of phenomena has never happened again in my family home. I have no clue if someone was messing with our home, to intimidate us, or maybe it was some of my school friends pranking me. They never owned up to it. If it was them, though, sometimes I wonder if it was something supernatural. I have heard rumors about those lost at sea returning and knocking on doors. Hi Jay. Actually, I cover that last point in more depth in another video. I will put a link to that one in the bio. It was in the Sea Story collection, if you've heard that one before. This happened before a national holiday not too long ago. I didn't have school the next day, and that's always a cause for celebration. I was up kind of late for my age. It was about 10:30. I was in high school back then. I would just have to quickly explain my family dynamic, because it will make sense later. My father passed away when I was younger. My mother works all the time and I live with my grandparents. That night my granddad was out and my grandma was somewhere downstairs. I was studying for exams, high pressure stuff. I was supposed to care about it massively for some reason, but I was more interested in my music back then. To be honest, I used to listen to my tunes through the PSP. Can you imagine? I was taking a break from studying. Just trying to give my eyes a little rest. So I set my PSP down. I leaned back on my chair and I shut my eyes for a second. I opened and I looked at my bedroom door. I noticed something. It sent my head into a spin. I saw something weird. It was the figure of a person who wasn't a family member. It was just this shadowy shape peering at me around the corner of the door of the room. Across the hall was an empty room. We used it for storage. There was no logical reason why that shadow should be cast in that room. I first thought that my mom or my grandma had left the window open to air out the house, and I was seeing a very human-looking curtain position, or said curtain, being caught on the balcony or something. But that seemed highly implausible, especially since the way it seemed to be leering around the door to look at me. It was no trick of the light. I watched that shadow then emerge from the spare room and enter the hallway. It was like it was fixated on me, even though it was dark. I could tell by the movements of that thing that it was facing me. It crept around the door, into the hallway with its back against the door in the hallway wall. I then watched as it slowly backed off towards the stairs, and before I could see it descend the stairs, it disappeared. Here's the weird thing. It looked like it was the same height as me by its silhouette. It looked like it had the same hair. It looked just like me. It's really hard to explain now. Like I said, it was just my grandmother and I in the house at the time. She didn't go upstairs much because she had bad hips, but if it was her, I would recognize her silhouettes and surely she would hit a light or something. I was left there in my chair, shuddering, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. What does it mean? Something that kind of looked like me was watching me from the other room. Why, for what purpose was this some kind of spirit or shadow person? Did it leave because I spotted it? What would have happened if I didn't notice its presence? I was just horrified. When my brain searched and searched for logical answers, it came back with none. It was just terrifying. I started to freak out a bit and then I thought, oh God, what if it comes back? I didn't want to go downstairs, because that was the last place I saw that thing head off to. I still have no idea what the hell it was, and I lived in that house right up until I moved out in fear that I would see that shadowy figure again. But thankfully I didn't. I did wonder if it could have been a home intruder. Maybe, I guess I was young. Maybe I didn't know. I don't know. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I think I would have seen some more features of that invader or their clothes. I don't think that's what it was. I never told anyone in my family about what happened that night, because I was worried that they would laugh at me and call me weak. I didn't want my mom to worry about me when she was out working so many hours. I do wonder. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. If they would have believed me if I told them this happened when I was on a late night walk in my neighborhood when I was in high school. I had this strange habit of heading out late going on walks around the city. I know it's a bit of a dangerous thing for a teenager to do, but I just did it all the time. I grew up in the suburbs, by the way. So if I snuck out like 2 or 3 a.m., for example, I would never get stopped by the police or get caught by my family. I really liked that time in the morning. I didn't have to worry about anything annoying. I had a lot going on at the time and it was nice to have that kind of escape route. So anyways, I snuck out one night as usual for my nightly stroll. I usually went out like that on average about 3 times a month. During my walk I spotted a guy wearing a gray suit. He looked as if he was an office worker. I mean, it's not that out of the ordinary to see something like that, right? An office worker heading home late at night after a night out drinking. It's hardly front page news over here. What was unusual was the fact that he was stood stock still at the top of the slide in our local park. He looked like a standard middle-aged office worker, but to see a guy like that so out of place was really jarring. Why was he stood on a slide in the middle of the night? His head was facing away from me, so I couldn't make out what kind of expression he had. He looked to be fixated on something. I was shocked, but then I reminded myself that I had seen an office worker before sleeping on a park bench, and this wasn't all that different. The guy was probably at the top of the slide because he was either looking for something or trying to get his bearings. I didn't care all that much. I decided to keep moving on. I kept walking for about an hour more before I got tired and felt like going home. In order to get home, I needed to pass by the park on the opposite side. I got back to the park and remembered the guy on the slide. I wondered, as I was starting to feel more than a little tired, if he would still be there. I guessed that he wouldn't be, but I was wrong. A guy had been stood in the same position for at least 40 minutes now. I thought it was weird. I stopped there by the park and I watched. The man was standing in the same position as last time. All the while I watched him, he didn't move a single muscle. I felt a chill trickle down my spine. For some reason, I decided to just go home and leave him to whatever he was doing. As I passed by, I noticed something. When I saw him the first time, his head had been facing the other direction, and when I passed him by the second time, I noticed that his head was facing the other direction, the opposite direction. So basically, in 40 minutes he had done little more than turn his head. Why was he now looking the other way? Was he trying to hide his face from me? I don't know how I could have known that I was gonna be there. I felt as if all the pores were opening on my body. There was something weird going on. I should have just ran home, but I didn't. I decided to head to the other side of the park once again, and when I got there, his head was facing in the opposite direction. I thought about going in the other direction, but I just didn't have the courage. I didn't know what that was all about, but it creeped me out. I kept thinking about what would happen if he turned to face me, and I really didn't like those thoughts. It doesn't sound all that creepy, I guess, if you weren't there, but this experience lives with me. I don't think it was something paranormal there. It was a very real person, but what they were doing stood on a slide at 3 in the morning, stuck still for 40 minutes straight. It's something I cannot answer. Maybe it was a drunken prank, or something. By the way, I didn't go out walking late in that area again. Oh, this happened when I was in the lower grades of elementary school. Now, back when I was little, I used to share a room with my sister. We had a kind of bunk bed situation going on, and because she was the elder sister, she got the top bunk. Why was that such a coveted thing back in those days? I have no idea anyway. So one night I was lying there in the bottom bunk and I called out to my sister. I know I wanted to know if she was awake, but I have no idea what I was going to talk to her about. My sister didn't reply. I guess that she had just fallen asleep, from that age up to present day. Whenever I get into bed, I end up thinking about things and then I become unable to sleep. When I couldn't sleep at that age, I would just stare up at the slats in the bed above me. After a while, my eyes would become accustomed to the darkness. I would sometimes look around our bedroom to see what I could see in the dark. That night I gradually scanned my eyes over the room and then a black object came into my field of vision. It scared the hell out of me, to be honest, but I tried to remain calm and keep my composure. But I would be lying if I said that I didn't feel my heart pounding in my chest. When I looked at the black object directly, I quickly understood what it was. It was my sister's long dark hair hanging off the side of the top bunk, dangling down. I smiled myself and went back to looking at the slats above my head. I then did a kind of double take because something dawned on me. There was something wrong. The hair that was dangling off of the top bunk seemed longer than my sister's hair, not by a couple of centimeters. I'm talking about a good 20 centimeters, a good 7 inches. My heart resumed pounding. I shut my eyes and then I opened them again. I opened them slowly. I didn't want to, but curiosity got the better of me. I stared at the hair. It wasn't my sister's hair. I knew that deep down in my heart. We did each other's hair all the time and I knew exactly what her hair looked like. When I opened my eyes, the position of the hair had changed. It was clearly not the back of someone's head. What I thought I was looking at was the back of my sister's head angling over the side of the bed, but in actuality what I was the front of someone's head. With the hair dangling off of the top bunk, the head slowly and silently moved into a position where it was peering down at me. Over the edge of the top bunk, the long dark hair was hanging off the head towards the floor. The eyes of an unknown woman locked into mine. The upside-down face of an unknown woman in my dark bedroom caused me to panic and become completely stunned like in my bed. I literally couldn't move. I felt as if I was paralyzed to the point where I couldn't even breathe. My muscles felt so hard they began to shake with fear all the while. This unknown woman glared at me like some kind of snake. I was really panicking, but I knew I needed to do something. I shut my eyes, summoned all my inner strength and screamed for my mom. I felt like that scream came from the bottom of my stomach. It gave me the power or courage to leap out of bed and race to my mom's room. I slept with my mom that night and up until we moved house. I went to bed as early as possible every night. I didn't want to be the last one awake or be up late because I thought that woman would come back. I remember her face so clearly. It's hard to explain. Maybe even harder if you don't know the example of who I'm talking about. But I will say that she looked like a famous athlete we have over here in Japan called Tani Ryoko. But she didn't smell like Tiny Ryoko. She was just something else. Anyway, here's a photo. If it helps, keep in mind. I was about 7 or something when this happened and my sister was only a year older than I was, so I'm unable to convince myself. Seeing that face was a trick of the light. The sad thing about this was whenever I saw Tani Ryoko, I got the chills I still do now. She didn't even do anything. I don't know. Sometimes I think maybe our home had a history. I didn't see the unknown woman again, and I can only thank all the known gods for that for it. This story features some grotesque depictions. This happened about 8 years ago back when I was living in Yokohama. I had a job on Nihanodori, but I was living in a bad neighborhood. I lived in a really run-down apartment near Bandobashi. I didn't hate it there because I wasn't exactly fond of a simple life. You know, public order or societal rules. If you went out at night in my area, you would likely see tons of orders. It's a predator and prey situation. Half of the creeps out there are looking to make some cash from whatever method they think is possible, and the other half of the creeps they prey upon. Yeah, I saw all kinds of strange things while I was living out there. I'll give you a couple quick examples. There was this old dude who was always drunk and lying in the road, no matter what time of day or night. It was another one was this woman who, when she was shopping in the local supermarket, she would say everything she was doing out loud. There were many more examples, but none more memorable than what happened when I headed home late one night. I had a motorbike and I used it to drive to a nearby parking lot. There I would cut the ignition and then push it through a narrow alleyway back to my building. Using this shortcut was really great because it saved me a lot of time, hassle and gas. The only problem was the fact that a lot of bums and drunks used that alley to either drink, piss or pass out. I tried not to use the shortcut all the time. I mean, it was a really dark and narrow place. It wasn't great, but it was fine anyways. I was working late that night. I didn't think I'd ever leave the office until about 1 a.m. It's crazy, right? But it happens in Japan more often than you might think. The seniors at our company stayed even later than us putting together the paperwork for a new contract. But when they said you young people can go home, me and a few others jumped at the chance. Since I left for home later than I wanted, I decided to use my alley shortcut. I just wanted to go to sleep. I couldn't even be bothered to push my bike back to my building. I just left it right there in the parking lot. I entered the alley and I saw a black mass in the alley. Some kind of shape. It made me stop dead in my tracks. It was just visible due to the far-reaching streetlight. It looked like a large garbage bag at a distance. As I drew closer to the black mass in the alley, I wondered what it was, but then I heard a weird noise. It sounded like a squelching kind of noise, like someone wading through mud. I realized that the squelching noise seemed to react to my movement. Each time I took a step forward, I heard it subtly. Perhaps that was a coincidence. This happened while I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Because with each step I realized something else too. The black mass before me in the alley wasn't a garbage bag. It was a human. No, not just one human, but two. One of the human shapes seemed to be lying down with its feet facing my way. The other humanoid shape, it seemed to be on top of the first shape, with its back facing towards me. This humanoid shape was wearing black, and it looked like it was doing something. Well, this shocked me. I couldn't believe people would want to. You know, I was in the first get down in bum alley. It was gross, creepy and just plain weird. But the fundamental feeling I felt at the time was one of pure exhaustion. So I was like, whatever. I'm going home. Another point, I was so used to this alley at my area. I guess that seeing what I saw wasn't all that disturbing or shocking. I was kind of desensitized at that point. I didn't know what to do. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. So I just stood there for a while, trying to remain silent, trying to figure out whether or not to try and pass them by or turn back. I was about 2 or 3 meters away from them in the alley, and then disaster struck. My company cell phone began to ring. It gave me such a fright. I never had my phone on the highest volumes, but at that time of night, in the quiet of the alley, It sounded like the loudest thing in the world. It turns out that I wasn't the only one surprised by the sound of my ringtone, because the person who was on top of the other person spun around to face me. I got a look at him. He was a middle-aged man, by the look of it. He was wearing spectacles and a dark coat with the hood up. He looked a little chubby too. The most notable thing about that guy was what he was holding. He held a hatchet-looking bladed weapon in one hand. I got a look at his face. There was just enough streetlight to make it out that night. He had a dark stain all over his mouth. I saw white puffs of breath coming out of his mouth with each exhalation he took. He panted like a dog. His round little spectacles looked all up to. They were pure white. While he was turned in my direction, I could see more of the person he was on top of. There was a whitish-looking object. Kind of looked like a hand. The person underneath the man with the glasses looked to be pinned down, lying on their front. The yellowish end of that hand, like object, was facing me, and I instantly recognized what it was. It looked like it was some kind of bloody stump. I then realized what that dark stain around the guy with the glasses mouth was, as well as the sound. That terrible squelching sound that I had heard earlier is likely the sound of the man in the glasses. The guy he was on top of looked smaller than him. Perhaps he was one of the bums or the drunks I'd ran into in the alley before I was frozen in place for a little while. But as soon as my brain got out of first gear, I turned on my heels and I got the hell out of the alley. I remember wanting to scream, but I just couldn't. I heard him kind of grunt, and then I heard an object get flung in my direction. It collided with one of the walls in the alley. It sounded metallic. I'm guessing that it was his weapon. My heart was racing. When you're so scared like that, deep down in the bottom of your heart, you'll find that you can't even breathe. From behind me, I heard the shout of that man. It didn't sound natural. It sounded like some kind of inhuman, guttural growl. I'm not saying the guy wasn't a human, because he was. I'm just saying that whatever noise came out of that man came from a very disturbed place. I ran straight into the local convenience store to be in the safety of the light. I hung out there for a while until I was certain that the man hadn't followed me. As soon as I was sure I was safe, I literally broke down in the men's room while I was sobbing and freaking out. I think I must have attracted the attention of the store worker and maybe any customers who were out as late as I was. Just then, as I was about to compose myself, my cell phone rang again. One of the seniors of my company had been trying to get in touch. I can't remember exactly what he wanted, but it was something like he needed access to a shared file which was password protected or something, or he didn't know where something was saved. He noted that I sounded upset, and he showed something similar to concern towards me, which felt so entirely alien. It was almost as frightening as what I saw in the alley. I didn't know how I could answer him with the truth, so I just lied and said that everything was fine, and I hung up. I felt that at least speaking to someone had a calming effect, so I decided to go to the nearest police station to make a report. However, there was no one at the front desk. There was a number to call if the desk wasn't attended, and I called it, but no one picked up. I was afraid to go home that night. I didn't want to be in the same area as what I saw. I took a taxi to the next town over and spent the night in a 24-hour cafe in Sokorojicho, and then I headed home in the morning as soon as the sun came up. I phoned in sick for work. I spent most of the day looking for a new place to live. I haven't been anywhere near that alley since. I have no idea what happened that night, but I keep checking news sources for any kind of cannibalistic reports. I know what I saw. I just hope that man still isn't out there. This didn't happen all that long ago. I ran out of smokes late one night and I needed to head to the convenience store. You might be thinking, why the hell didn't this dude just wait for the next day since it was late? Well, I say to you, cigarettes and snacks are essential to my productivity and mental power. So it was non-negotiable. You see what I mean? It's a watertight argument. It was summer but kind of chilly at night. I only had a t-shirt on at home, so I went to my closet and selected a suitable jacket and headed out. I remember that there was a crescent moon out that night and I was in good spirits. I got to the convenience store without anything noteworthy happening so far. This is a riveting story about a man buying some smokes and some sweets, but stick with it or not. Whatever. So anyways, I was in the store scoping out the chocolate juice, etc. I walked over to the counter to tell the employee what smokes I wanted, and a guy came rushing into the store. He looked pale and nervous, almost tweaking out. But not that that thing where people get so impatient or stressed. They start scratching up their neck randomly. Or their arms. It was like that. Anyways, he rushes in and he asks the clerk where the salt is. I was all like, you back of the line. What are you doing? But then I thought, hey, let's listen in on this one. I set my items down on the counter and looked at the guy side-eyed. And after a while I turned to the guy and asked, is everything all right? Something like that, I mean. What would you do in my situation? I looked him up and down and I noticed something. The guy looked as if he had been running around in the mud. His clothes were filthy. Moreover, it looked as if there was some dirty little handprints on his clothing too. I looked at those markings on his clothing for a while and I thought to myself, those are definitely handprints. I found it weird that they were small handprints. Though anyhow, the guy doesn't really reply to me. He just kind of nods and then he tries to catch the attention of the clerk. He asks the store worker, is there a shrine around here? Man, I need to get myself purified. You know me, and the clerk exchanged some glances and we must have been thinking the same things. Because we both smirked with each other. The guy goes off to get his purchases or to the bathroom. I'm not sure. During the time he's away from the counter, I asked the store clerk if he had any idea what that was all about, and his answer kind of shocked me. He said that a guy is stressed out, as that guy wasn't all that rare. The guy comes back to the counter with some salt and we spoke again. Apparently there is a supposedly haunted spot in our area. I was so intrigued. I just had to ask for more detail. The rumor around town was that we had ourselves a haunted garbage can. I almost laughed in that guy's face when he told me that. But I held it together. Basically, something would always appear in the garbage can or near it in the park, a few meters away from the convenience store, like some kind of cursed object, spawn zone. By the sound of it, the guy kind of gestured towards the direction of where that garbage can was. I was so curious. I kept pressing him for more information. Okay. So this guy claimed that he had found it all set on top of the garbage can. The doll in question was there. I see him as you do. Here's an image of one. If you want to conceptualize, it's on screen. Now imagine seeing that on the top of a garbage can at a park in the dead of night. The guy insisted that the doll attacked him. He said it attacked him. When he went to pick it up, its little hands hit back at him. This was such a crazy thing to hear. I didn't think it was scary. I just thought it kind of sounded cute. To be honest, I wanted to see the doll for myself. So I asked the guy how I could find the spooky garbage can. And once he told me, I headed out there to find it. I went to the exact location the man said, but I could not find it. There was nothing there. I turned to head home and give up. But then I felt as if the convenience store bag I was carrying suddenly became a lot more heavier. Thought that when I looked into the bag I would see that doll for sure. For some reason I looked into the bag and I'm not sure if it was because it was dark and my eyes were making shapes out of shadows. But I swear I saw like a child's face. It wasn't cute at all and not that kind of doll that the guy said. It looked like. It had a grumpy expression. A little like the Cheshire Cat. It did look like a doll. This happened when I was in the first or second year at junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I have to say, rather than feeling shocked or horrified, I was enraged. I didn't want something gross to be all up in my bag with my stuff, so I slammed the bag as hard as I could against a nearby telephone pole. I heard the sound of something being crushed, and then some black liquid began to drip out from the bag. I thought, well, maybe this place is haunted or cursed, but then I realized I was wrong. Shortly afterwards, The only thing that I had managed to kill was my cans of cold coffee, and I bet that the chocolate I had bought had died of death. Damn it. I looked into the bag and I could still see that distorted shadowy doll face in there. So I kept blasting the bag against the telephone pole. I only stopped when it suddenly felt lighter. I looked in the bag and there was no longer a creepy face peering back at me. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. So I lit a smoke, and as soon as I took a puff, I heard something crying or sobbing in the distance, deeper into the park. That was enough for me. I got the hell out there. I got out there and I left my destroyed back there. I am sorry. I'm usually really against littering, but I was freaking out and it kind of happened. I headed back to the convenience store and the guy was still in there talking to the clerk. I told him about what had happened and complained that there wasn't at all there. He listened to my story and ended up insisting on replacing my chocolate and canned coffees. That was really nice, I guess. Anyways, I just wanted to own it all that moved by itself. So it's kind of an anticlimactic ending here. I really wanted that, though maybe next time for it. At the end of last summer, two friends and I went camping by a local lake. We drove out to the campsite, set up our tents and had dinner. Everything was going so well. It was a fun night. We lit a fire and sat around it talking for a while. It would be a long while before we were ready to go to sleep. We spoke about the lake and how it was responsible for claiming a fair few lives each year. Some say it's a place where people go to end things, and others say that the waters are deceptively deep and filled with tangled weeds, tree limbs, and the riverbed is lined with thick, unsucked papable silt and mud. As we three sat there in front of the fire talking, we all noticed something out on the other side of the lake. There were bright lights. Since there were other campsites dotted around the lake, we passed this off as simply another group of people camping out for the night. We didn't pay much attention. After a while, I noticed that the lights seemed to be getting bigger and brighter. We continued chatting and then the lights caught our attention again. It looked as if it was moving closer to us. Again, it seemed to grow bigger and bigger. It was moving way too fast to be a rowing boat, and motorboats were prohibited on the lake. Before we knew it, the light had made its way to our side of the lake. The light was right in front of us, and then it was over us. It was as if we were being slowly swallowed by this bright light. In every direction I looked, I could see nothing but light. Just as soon as it came, it was gone. In total, I would say that the light was over us and around us for no more than 3 seconds tops. My friends and I were smoking around the campfire before the light approached, and I remember this very clearly. I watched my friend light up as the light was moving, and by the time the light was gone, my friend dropped the cigarette he had between his fingers as it had burned down to the filter and burned the insides of its index and middle fingers. A fresh cigarette shouldn't burn down to the filter in a matter of 3 seconds. It seemed like we had some missing time. We couldn't account for me, and my friends didn't even have our smokes. They were gone. This wasn't even the strange part. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. No, the smokes were weird, but it gets weirder. My friend who got burned started screaming as he didn't know what was going on, and his screams were the first thing I could remember I heard after that light passed over us. I think that I was in some kind of trance until that moment. I looked down and I was knee-deep in the lake. He was up to his waist in the lake, and our other friend was silently wading further and further into the middle of the lake. We both screamed out to him, and yet he didn't respond. We tried to get over to him as quickly as possible, but you know what it's like running in water. We were also sinking. As we ran, I gave up and swam for it. The dirty lake water went in my mouth. I got to him first, since I was further than my other friend in the lake, and as soon as I reached him, I slapped his back and shook him until he regained consciousness. None of us knew what the hell we were doing in the lake. But I can tell you this, if my friend wasn't smoking, then things would have ended differently. The lake is incredibly deep in the middle, and since my friend was up to his chest, I dread to think what might have happened to him and us. The chances of drowning seemed high. I have nightmares about me walking deeper and deeper into dark, murky water, unable to stop myself watching. The light above me grows darker as I sink to the bottom. I know firsthand now how dangerous it is in that lake. I have no idea what that light. Was it something paranormal or extraterrestrial? I don't think I'll ever find out, because I'm never going back to that lake. We got out of the lake, dried off and packed everything back into our car as fast as we could, leaving most of the things we brought behind. We left and nothing further happened, but that night is one I think about frequently. Last winter I went on a camping trip with some of my work colleagues. The location of the campsite was on some land owned by one of my colleagues' family members. It was his uncle's. His uncle passed away a while ago, and the land went untouched and grew wilder with each coming summer. As soon as we got there, he said that the terrain was rougher than he anticipated. There was a river and a steep hill, and surrounding the campsite, from all angles, was a thick, dense forest. It was the definition of secluded. We pitched a tent by the riverbank. It was like gravel in some areas, but we found a good spot. We built a campfire and made dinner. It was really relaxing. We were chatting long into the night, enjoying having the run of the land. We didn't need to worry about making too much noise because it was my friend's late uncle's land. As the hour grew later and the sky grew darker, we found ourselves running out of steam and we began to wind down for the night. I was halfway through a story when I noticed that my colleagues weren't listening to me. They seemed distracted by something. They were looking beyond me, across the river behind me. I turned to look and I saw a dark silhouette. It was the shape of a human. There was a person out there on the other side of the river. It was a dark night. We only had the campfire, so we couldn't really see clearly. The mood shifted once we saw that silhouette. There was tension in the air. My colleagues started to get nervous. It was his family's land, and there appeared to be some kind of intruder or trespass that stalked, still monitoring us. That person across the lake had no business being there. The shadowy figure seemed to hear our whispered conversation and retreated out of our sight into the darkness. My colleague said I need to sort this out, and with that he got up and crossed the small dilapidated bridge to the other side of the river. He went off into the darkness and told us to stay by the campfire. I thought he was very brave to do that. I mean, if he had waited a couple of minutes, I guess we could have all gone with him or at least talked about it. But it kind of was his land, and I guess the beers that we had shared had made him confident. So I thought, more power to you. We heard his footsteps fade out as he moved further away from the camp. We were just out in the elements with the sounds of the forest all around us. We couldn't get back the atmosphere we had before. We saw the silhouette. After a few minutes we heard footsteps coming closer, and we assumed that it was coming back to camp. But the footsteps ended up changing direction, and they retreated back towards the darkness. One of my colleagues yelled out, "What the hell are you doing? We're over here." Then the footsteps turned into the sound of running, and they were heading towards the woods. It was eerie. Something was off, and we were all a little freaked out, concerned for our missing camper began to settle in. We heard footsteps approaching our campsite again. I grabbed an empty beer bottle to use as a makeshift weapon if things got ugly, but I was relieved to see the face of my colleague. He sat back down next to us and said there was no one there. Maybe it was just a trick of the light or something. We told him about the footsteps we heard, and he seemed a little worried. Things were getting weirder and weirder. It was getting pretty sketchy. I don't think any of us wanted to spend the night there anymore. None of us wanted to be the first to say, "Let's go home." This happened when I was in the first or second year at junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Then we heard noises from the woods. More footsteps. Rocks were being thrown and other weird noises. That was enough. There were people out here and they were hostile. We packed up and got out. We went home without seeing a single person. Whoever was out there messing with us knew the hills and the woods better than my colleague did. I'm not sure what the hell that was, but I'm glad we didn't stick around to find out what would come next. I heard this one from my teacher while I was at university, and I felt like sharing it. So he and his friend went camping in a village in Wakayama Prefecture. They set up their tents by a river just as the sun was going down. Later they were both in the tent together chatting. His friend turned to him and said, "Hey, can you hear something?" He could. A kind of dragging sound coming from outside the tent. The tent wasn't zipped, so he looked out, but he couldn't see anyone out there. The noise didn't go away, though it sounded like something was being dragged around the tent. My teacher and his friend got out of the tent and had a look around, but there was nothing out there which could be making that noise. There was no one in sight. When they got out of the tent, they couldn't hear the noise, but the second they were back and they could hear it again. It was the strangest thing. It almost sounded like footsteps, like someone was dragging their feet as they walked. It made the pair of them feel uneasy, so they lit their lanterns and campfire and went about making dinner. While they ate, they couldn't hear that weird noise outside, so they felt a little more at ease. Later, as the hour grew late, they returned to their tent and got ready for bed. As soon as they got back into the tent, they heard the dragging sound again. They spoke about that noise and they agreed that it sounded like someone dragging something on their feet. They were really freaked out at this point, so they stayed in their sleeping bags and stayed awake. The sound wouldn't go away. The dragging sound just kept circling and circling the tent. They both must have checked 10 times each, but they never saw anything out there. It was unexplainable and terrifying. Eventually they both managed to convince the other there wasn't anything much to worry about, and they were able to get to sleep. The next morning, when they woke up, they couldn't hear anything, and because nothing happened during their slumber, they guessed that they got themselves worked up for nothing. They went about packing their things away. While getting everything sorted, they noticed something beneath their tent. They found a pair of old weather-damaged sandals. My teacher, who is a local to the area, said that a month before he went camping, an elderly woman lost her life in the river. My teacher believed that the circling sound was the spirit of that old woman searching for her missing sandals. This happened many years ago, during autumn. My parents told me we were going camping and I was allowed to bring a friend. I couldn't wait. I knew it was going to be fun. So when the weekend arrived, my parents and my friend and I went off into the mountains for a camping trip. It was only a one-night trip, but that was plenty for me. This took place when outdoor camping didn't seem as popular as it is now. When we arrived at the campsite, we were surprised to see that there were no other campers in sight. To be honest, it felt a little bit lonely. I soon forgot about that feeling. Since I was a schoolboy, I saw the campsite as our own private playground. We played by a nearby river and in the woods, and then later that night we had a campfire and a barbecue. It was really great. Just before bedtime my friend's mood changed. Usually he was full of self-confidence, but when the sun went down, his spirits damped. He started to get homesick and frightened. Eventually he told me through tear-filled eyes that he wanted to go home by the time he asked. It was far too late. My parents had a drink and we were getting ready for bed. We turned in for the night, the sounds of the forest all around us. It was pretty spooky out there in our tent in the wild, but we were able to get to sleep without any issues. The next morning we left for home. We planned on spending a little longer at the campsite, but my friend was clearly in a bit of distress and we headed home early. We left while it was still dark out. I can't remember what time it was in the morning, but I felt like everyone wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. So we returned home, and since it was the weekend, my parents went up to their bedroom to take a nap or something. Well, they said they were going to take a nap, but I heard a lot of banging around coming from up there. Anyway, it was still early in the morning and I was pretty tired. I nodded off while I was sitting on the sofa watching the morning cartoons. I woke up when the house phone rang. Back then we didn't have caller ID displays on our phones, so I had no idea who was calling. I was hoping it would be Grandpa. My parents showed no sign of coming downstairs to answer the call. It just kept ringing and ringing, so I picked it up. "Oh hey, good morning." The voice belonged to some girl I didn't immediately recognize. Based on my recollection, I would say that she sounded about my age, or perhaps it was an older woman with a youngish sounding voice. The more I think about it, the more I think it could be plausible, because I didn't think I gave any of my classmates my home phone number. I didn't say anything for a while. I just listened anyway. Camp was fun last night. The barbecue was really great too. The shrimp were delicious. I had a good laugh when your friend, who is usually so cheeky and confident, started tearing up because he was homesick. I still kept quiet. I was still sleepy at the start of the call, but now I was waking up. Something wasn't right. I was starting to get a little scared. There were only 4 of us at that campsite. How the hell did someone else know what we were doing out there? I couldn't answer that question by myself, so I asked the mysterious person on the end of the line. After some silence, some potentially shocked silence, I got my answer. Not the answer I wanted or expected, because we were together the entire time, and with that I heard a click followed by the dial tone. I was really freaked out, but I instantly thought that I might have been pranked by my friend. I called him immediately, but he said that he didn't tell anyone about what we did at the campsite except his parents. He said he was so embarrassed by everything he didn't even tell them the part where he was feeling homesick. When my parents came downstairs after their nap or whatever they were doing up there, I asked them if they gave anyone our number or told anyone about the camping trip, but they said they didn't tell anyone or give anyone a number. The only person they gave our number to was the person who reserved them the camping site. In the end, I guess, or maybe hope is the abject word here, that it was a prank and nothing more. But I have a strange feeling that we were being watched by someone that night in the woods. I cannot forget the last words I heard on the phone, because we were together the entire time for it. When I was in elementary school, I joined a camping trip for 2 nights hosted by the school during summer vacation. The campsite was about 2 hours from the nearest town. It was a proper camping trip. Even though it was technically a campsite, it wasn't very well maintained. There was a kitchen and a bathroom, and that was good, because at least it wasn't just the tents, but the place wasn't in great shape. Everything was dated and kind of shabby. The toilet was more of an outhouse. To be honest, it was way out in the field. The campsite was really close to some swampland, and on the other side was a cliff. Even as a kid, I remember thinking this is a really unsafe place to camp. We had plenty of activities available, such as hiking and fishing in the day and campfire and doing dares at night. On the first night I was there, I took up one of these stairs. I thought it would be a simple dare, but it was different to the ones I did that age. We call them tests of courage, and they're not usually this intense. This was a dare that was created by the teachers, by the way. And it went like this: go into the woods at night without a flashlight alone and stay there for a while. There were rules to this dare too. If you start running or you scream, you'll alert the wild animals and become one of the kids who go missing around here. This is what the teacher said. I can understand that they were trying to make it fun for us, and I'm pretty sure that we were perfectly safe. But looking back on it, I guess that was kind of strange. We were told to stand there in the woods with no light, in complete darkness and in complete silence, until one of the teachers came back to get us. Even though I didn't really want to do this, I went along with him. I was somewhere far from home and far from civilization and mountains. It was a pretty obedient kid, so I walked with the teachers and their flashlights out into the middle of the woods. It was so dark and all I could hear was the sound of insects and the slow sigh of the trees. We got to where I guess was the designated spot, and the teachers' flashlights went off, and I heard them trudge away over broken branches and through thickets of weeds and bush. When that flashlight went off, there was nothing but darkness all around. Should have been other kids close by doing the dare with me, but I couldn't hear anyone else. I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or if they were closed. It was that dark. The air was accurate and warm. It seemed to cling to my skin. I heard the occasional rustle of bushes and the call of the wild. Some unknown animal was barking in the distance. I hoped that it was the distance. It was hard to say if it was near or far. Guess. In reality, it was only out there for a few moments. No longer than 5 minutes at tops, I guess. But those moments felt so long. It was so isolating. I felt completely alone in the world. Then the flashlights came out of nowhere and came straight towards me. I was relieved that they were back and I wasn't alone anymore. We all headed back to the campsite together. Our teachers were saying, "Oh, we're all lucky that we didn't see anything creepy this year." We were joking, and I guess I felt kind of brave and mature. It was good. The rest of the night was pretty uneventful. To be honest, the next day I noticed that my friend, who did the dare around the same time as I did, was looking awfully frightened. She was looking towards the cliffs, and when I asked what happened, she just replied, "Can't you see them?" I looked at her puzzled. "Take a look." She took me to the edge of the field, towards the cliffs. "Look down there." I looked down there and I couldn't see what she was talking about. There was nothing but a flowing stream down below. But my friend looked like she was on the verge of tears. "The kids with red faces down there. Can't you see them?" She said that she could see a girl and a boy that I couldn't. She was shouting and crying. It clearly had upset her. Soon after, the teachers came over to see what all the fuss was about and to try and console her. But just like me, they couldn't see what she was talking about. I was worried about my friend, but life on the campsite carried on. As you know, kids have short memories and attention spans. I guess we all got distracted and forgot about it. Later that night I was really tired, but a lot of the other kids were still awake and still lively. I was snug in my sleeping bag and, on the verge of sleep, I heard them whispering excitedly and happily in the glow of the lamplight. And just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard the tone of the kids around me shift. Excitement gave way for tension, and I heard them whisper. I popped my head out of the sleeping bag and I saw two girls leaning over. Another girl sat on the floor leaning forward. The girl on the floor was complaining of pain. "It hurts," she said. She was complaining of feeling crushed, and right before our eyes she folded her chin, was nearly touching the floor. It was as if something heavy was on her back. She cried and she screamed, and everyone in the tent was panicked. It was one of those huge outdoor tents. By the way, everything was happening so fast. It was so stressful. Everyone was so frightened. I never heard screaming like that before. The teachers came rushing in, and one had a bottle of salt in their hand. He sprinkled it everywhere and started hitting the girl on the back with his palm. And miraculously the girl stopped crying and screaming. She was up on her feet like nothing had happened after that. Nothing else of note truly happened. We went home without issue. On the bus home I spoke with some of my friends and other groups of kids I weren't friendly with about what happened. Some kids had different experiences. One said that when they went to the outhouse at night, there was a kid they didn't know stood stock still staring at them. Another kid said that they saw shadows everywhere. They looked humanoid shadows. I was really surprised that there were more experiences. The mountains are a truly unusual place. My friend who saw those kids with the red faces has been kind of mountain phobic since that trip. I can't even remember why I wanted to go on. That trip feels like some vague half memory. Like it was some liminal space. This happened when I was in high school. My friends and I were all camping together deep in the forest. We had just finished dinner and we were clearing things up, joking around. And that's when I heard a huge thud by the expressions of my friends' faces. I was certain that they had heard it as well. It sounded as if something had fallen by our tent. It was dark. We grabbed some flashlights and we went in search of the source of that thought. There was something big and white laying on the ground. It looked like an animal. We were freaking out. We shone our torches at it from a distance. The more we looked at it, the more it looked like a body. A human body. He had fair balding hair and we approached slowly. Something was wrong, though his limbs were bent in impossible angles. We rushed in, realizing the gravity of the situation, and we got close enough to have a good look. We now knew it wasn't a human, but it was as big as a human. It was a mannequin. Where the hell did that come from? Someone threw that at us. We scanned the area with our torches and no one was around. We didn't even hear footsteps or anything. When it happened, we were camping deep in the woods and we didn't see anyone else. The whole day. One of our friends decided to be a watchman, while the rest of us packed up as fast as we could. We got the hell out of there, leaving that creepy mannequin lying face down in the dirt. This happened when I was a child. My parents and I went on a camping trip with some family friends. There was a big lake by the campsite. It was a really peaceful and secluded area. We all put up our tents close to the river and we were set to camp for the days. When night came, my friends were talking about doing some dares. The adults overheard us and told us not to do any dares at night because it might be dangerous. Well, of course, we all ignored our parents' advice. The dare was to walk around the lake by yourself with no flashlight. When it was dark, one of my friends offered to go first. We all waited in silence. As she walked off into the darkness, she came back after a while. She wasn't frightened in the slightest. Next was my turn. They urged me forward. I was nervous. I felt the pressure of my friends. I had to do it. It was so dark I was getting really worried. I was walking around the lake. Only the sounds of nature could be heard until I heard footsteps approaching me. I prepared myself as best I could for whoever was coming towards me. It looked like one of my parents' friends. He was walking with a flashlight. I knew him. I was relieved. I waved at him as he approached and he strolled towards me here. He handed me something. It was a lemon candy and I thanked him. He should, he said in a hushed voice. I told him I'd eat it later and I put the candy in my pocket. He was shining his torch at me. I couldn't see his face. Clearly he had his hood up. Come with me. He said it didn't sound normal. I said that I had to go back to my tent. I thought it was really weird because he was such a nice guy and we were really enjoying the camping trip with his family and my family. When I got back to the tent, we all decided we'd get some sleep. I was lying in bed holding that candy, thinking about how I should thank him tomorrow for him. So in the morning I walked over to him while he was drinking coffee and I thanked him for the lemon candy. What are you talking about? I didn't give you any candy. Said I thought he was just teasing me, trying to trick me or something. After a while I could tell he wasn't joking. Said he wasn't at the lake. That night my mom came out of the tent. She had heard our conversation. It got weirder and weirder. I went back to my tent and I got the lemon candy to show them. All of the parents and my friends looked concerned and frightened. Who was that person I met at the lake? I threw that piece of candy away as all families packed up our things. We got out of there as soon as we could. Thank you, Foreign. This happened in 2009 when I was fishing in the summer. It was an area with steep hills and cliff faces. It seemed like a place where locals wouldn't pass through, as it was a bit of a trek to get there. It is said that the river is home to big game fish. It was really secluded. It was the weekend and I imagined there to be a couple of people, but I was delighted to find that I was the only person pitched up on the river. After setting up my tent, I cooked and relaxed a little, then went off to sleep in my sleeping bag in the tent. It was nighttime. I planned on getting up early to start fishing at daybreak. I was having a perfectly sound night of sleep until I heard this horrible, loud sound. It shocked me out of sleep. I opened my eyes immediately. I didn't know where I was for a second. I hate that feeling. I couldn't hear the sound anymore, but my tent was shaking. I looked at my watch. It was 2 a.m. I told myself, in my half-asleep state, to remain calm and composed. I thought, wow, maybe this is that sleep paralysis I've heard about. I considered that it might be happening or I was suffering from some sort of auditory hallucination. But this just seemed too real. This was no sleep paralysis, I realized with a shudder. Another possibility crossed my mind, a rock, for I remember checking the cliff before I pitched my tent. It wasn't rocky. The soil was hard and dry since it was summer. But this wasn't an impossibility. I didn't think that it could be a human in the middle of the night outside my tent. That thought was too terrifying to consider in the dark alone. So I tried to think about the possibilities, because I was working myself up getting frightened. I knew I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep. I turned on the light in my tent, which put me at ease a little, but I didn't feel like going outside to check. I told myself not to worry as soon it would be bright outside and I would be fishing. Just as I was calming myself down, I heard something outside. It was quiet for a moment until I heard another sound, dead, like someone wailing, moaning and groaning, whatever. I felt as if I was going to pass out from the fear. On the other hand, I was thinking it's a bit lighter now. What if it is a person and they need help or something? I was worried for whoever might be out there, so I decided to leave my tent. Just as I reached for the tent zip, the moaning got louder. I paused for a moment. Cold sweat teemed from my brow. I could see something outside the other side of the tent, a dark shadow. Now I was certain that someone was out there. I grabbed my torch and my frying pan as a weapon. I pulled the zipper down and decided to face whoever was out there messing with me. I leaned out and looked around. I scanned everywhere. There was nobody around. I could see a fishing boat in the distance, but that was all. I couldn't see the owner of that shadow that darkened my tent. It was deathly silent. It was truly terrifying. I withdrew back into the tent. If you think about it, the tent was illuminated by my torch from the inside, so I shouldn't have been able to see a shadow outside to the light. It was absolutely unexplainable. I turned the radio on to calm myself. I was shivering in my tent, trying not to think about what had just happened. After a while, I was listening to the DJ chatting between the tracks. I was slowly regaining some composure, but then the roof of the tent collapsed inward. It hit the ground, accompanied with a horrendous sound. I knew this time that it was no dream or hallucination. The roof of the tent was utterly destroyed. Moreover, it hurt me badly as it crashed in. I felt totally helpless, and I'm not ashamed to say this. I broke down and I started crying. I vowed to go home without doing any fishing. As soon as the sun came up, the moaning sound outside persisted. There was a new sound. Now it sounded like something dragging across the ground or crawling, perhaps, I don't know why. But I turned the radio up to its maximum volume. Kind of felt like the only defense I had left when daybreak finally came. It was like seeing God or something. I was so relieved. The sun was up now and I could finally see everything around me. I went out of the tent and looked around the area. There were beer cans, bottles and flowers scattered everywhere. I hurriedly folded the remnants of my busted tent, but I stopped in my tracks when I realized that there was blood on the outside of it, as if someone had smeared it above on the cliff. There probably was a road. At some point, I wondered if there had been some kind of accident there. Maybe someone passed away in the area I set up camp, and perhaps, due to the nature of their death, they became some kind of horrible spirit that tormented me. I didn't know what else to do, but I offered my remaining juice to whatever spirit might be around, left as an offering to ease their passing and wish them happiness in life. I chose to believe this because the reality of some people or person out there messing with me and my tent in the middle of the night is just too terrifying to consider. I work for a wildlife magazine. My job is to take photos of animals in their natural habitat. A normal working day for me would be setting up my tent on a mountain waiting for animals to come along. I also use an infrared sensor hooked up to automatic shutter. I never use popular mountain rails, as animals would be too scared to come out if lots of people are around. I have never been frightened on the job. Although I am always working alone in the dark, I have never had any troubles until now. I arrived at about 1 o'clock to the area I had previously researched online. It was by the bank of the swamp. The usual routine is I set up my one-man tent and then take a nap till about 5 p.m. Because I'm always camping deep in the mountains, there's never anyone around. It feels safer than the city in many ways, actually. That afternoon I hung my radio from a tree branch and got in my tent ready to go for a nap. When I woke up later, it was already dark. I hung my lantern from the tree branch and started getting my camera equipment ready. I put my headlamp on and prepared to shoot some photos. I remembered being unusually tense and full of anticipation. I headed out of the tent, and that's when I noticed something strange. Upstream from the swamp, about 10 meters away, I noticed a tent. It was a blue tent. It was weird. This wasn't a fishing area. This was a totally uninhabited area. I didn't think it was a mountain climber or a hiker. I couldn't imagine anyone else being here. But me. I could see no lights coming from that tent. Maybe someone was asleep in there. Nevertheless, that tent wasn't there. When I was setting up mine, did someone come along silently whilst I was sleeping? It's kind of weird that whatever noise they made didn't wake me up. Anyway, I pushed on and started looking for a good place to take photos. At that moment, a light went on in the blue tent, which made the tent color change. It went a darker color. Maybe I should go say a courteous hello, I thought. But then I decided against that idea, as the tent freaked me out a bit. That's really an excuse, though I didn't want to go anywhere near it. I was scared of it. Whoever might be inside it. I wanted to move to another spot. It would be a pain, but I didn't think I would be able to concentrate with that tent on my mind. I set about dismantling my tent as quietly as possible. Whilst trying to remain out of sight of that tent, I gathered up my stuff and began trekking deeper into the mountainous woods. I must have walked over a kilometer alongside the river up the mountain. I set up camp at the top of a steep hill. By the time I put my tent up again, it was unfortunately too late to do any photography. It was past 9 o'clock. I decided to have some dinner. After eating, I thought I would just try to get some sleep. There wasn't much else I could do. It should have been chilly since it was the middle of May, but I woke up in the middle of the night sweating in my sleeping bag. A quick glance at my watch told me it was just after 10. The air in the tent was warm and stale, so I pulled the zipper down to let some fresh, cool night air in. I gasped. The blue tent was right in front of my tent. The strange lights came on in the tent again. To hands pressed against the dirty fabric of the blue tent. The person in the tent was reaching towards me in the darkness for a moment. I felt so distant, so stunned, but I quickly came to my senses and grabbed my torch and pointed it at the blue tent. Whatever was in that tent was groping around to grab the zip and get out. It must have heard me, so my torchlight. I ran for him. I didn't dare look back behind me. I fell in the swamp as I ran. My lower body was soaking. I didn't let that stop me, though it was pitch black. As I ran, I tripped and stumbled countless times, but I was determined to get away from that tent. I somehow lost my torch along the way when I physically couldn't run anymore. I crouched by a tree and shivered in fear and waited for the morning light. When morning came, I walked back to the place my tent was and out of the tent. I called to let my presence be known. I was done with being scared. I just spent a whole night out in the freezing cold. I shouted out again, but there was no response, so I approached. Both tents were still there. The blue tent looked a bit more worn and tattered. I looked inside my tent. It seems as if the person or the people in the blue tent had left me a passing gift. A pile of bones, human bones, animal bones. I have no idea. They were all mashed up. I don't do solo trips that deep in the mountains or the woods anymore. A few years back, a bunch of friends and I went camping in Aberaki during spring vacation. It was May. The weather was good. I went with 3 friends, so 4 men in total. Three of my friends go to this camp basically every year. But for me it was my first time. I hadn't been camping with these guys before, but I was excited to join them. They sold it to me pretty well. They said the beach was beautiful. They said that there is usually not that many people around on the beach, so we could do whatever we felt like without others bothering us or annoying us. After coming off National Highway 51 and going down a narrow road for a few hundred meters, we arrived at the beach. We saw a family camper van just by the entrance to the beach, so we decided to pitch up away from them about 100 meters. By lunch the beach was full of surface, but by dinner time they had all cleared off. The beach was empty for as far as the eye could see, except for the family camper van, just us and them, as there were no lights around and it was so quiet. I fell asleep way faster than usual. We all slept in the same tent. Three of the guys slept side by side, and I slept at the bottom, by their feet, near the zipper of the tent, like a dog. I woke up in the middle of the night with a desperate urge to piss. I thought I was going to piss my pants. I checked the time on my phone and it was past 10 a.m. I've never been one of those people who are too afraid of the dark or superstitious in any way. So that night I was listening to the waves as I was getting up. It was really relaxing. The only problem was I heard another sound. It was clear and distinct and it made me freeze in my sleeping bag. It was coming from no more than 5 meters away. It was a strange sound. It was coming closer to our tent. From the weight in the interval of each sound, I intuitively felt that it was footsteps. I couldn't see any light outside, walking along a secluded sandy beach with no flashlight. That's pretty strange. We were a good distance away from the family camper van, so they would have no reason to be walking so close to our tent. Plus, I heard the footsteps coming from the opposite direction. Is this a person? It sounds human with its slow, deliberate steps. My head was spinning. I was sweating in the darkness of the tent and I didn't dare to move a muscle. It was already too late. I could hear those footsteps circling our tent. They sounded like they were right outside, no more than 10 centimeters away. Whether it was started walking around our tent clockwise, just circling it. What are you doing? I wondered, what do I do? I sort of tried to wake one of my friends, but I didn't want to make a sound. I was too afraid to leave my sleeping bag. Felt the urge to use the bathroom and I just tried to stay as still as possible. I hoped and prayed that the footsteps would just go away, but things got worse. The footsteps continued circling clockwise, going round and around. Then something occasionally prodded the thin layer of fabric on our tent like a hand testing for a weak point of entry. The metal poles supporting the tent began to creak and bend. It made a horrible sound. I tried thinking of a song in my head and I kept repeating the lyrics and melody over and over. Just ignore it. It'll go away. I told myself and I closed my eyes tightly. And then it was bright outside of my tent. I must have drifted off. I was so relieved I ran out there quickly to pee, idiotically forgetting about last night. I looked back at the tent and I saw footprints. I will never understand this, but the footprints came from the sea and led back to the sea. I immediately woke my 3 friends up. I told them what happened and we decided to get the hell off of that beach. The next night we stayed in an area with lots of camper vans and other tourists foreign. Today's story ends. I wonder if you feel creepy. If you are interested in horror stories, welcome to subscribe to us. See you next time. Hello everyone. Today I will tell you a true horror story from a Japanese netizen's experience. It is a contribution from a netizen. I hope you like it. This happened about 10 years ago, but it's something that regularly plays on my mind. I think this happened just past 1 a.m. I was fast asleep, but then I was awoken by the sound of something heavy and metallic against something. It was stressful to be woken up like that and I was lying in bed wondering what had happened. About 30 seconds had passed when I heard the same sound again. Since I had another chance to hear the sound again, I now thought that it sounded like a metal pole or rod smashing against something heavy and dense. It continued. It seemed like it was occurring every 30 seconds or so. I had to take a look outside. It was so weird and I was very curious. My bedroom was on the second floor and it faced the street. I lived in a residential area. Back then it was usually very quiet, especially this late at night. We didn't get much noise from traffic passing either, so this was really odd. I was looking out of the window and for a while I couldn't even figure out where the noise was coming from. It looked like there was no one on the streets. Well, that's what I thought until I spotted a figure standing in the middle of the road, about 3 houses away. It was a man. He was slightly illuminated beneath the yellow street all wide. I wondered if he lived in one of the houses he was stood in front of. I hadn't seen him before and, based on the way he was, stood like a statue in the street, I wouldn't mind not seeing him again either. He was creeping me out and the man's feet was about 5 black garbage bags. They seemed to surround him. It was strange because in our area we were told by the council to use a kind of yellowish garbage bag. The trash collection workers said if it's not in a yellow bag, then they don't pick it up. To me this was a red flag. This is where things get really weird. I thought at one point the garbage bags he was stood over looked like a body. I must have stared at the man for about 10 to 15 minutes and he didn't move a muscle. The metal sound stopped after a while and I was too tired to figure out what was happening out there. So I went to bed. I woke up the next morning late for work and headed out. It wasn't until it was dark that I returned. Just as I was turning my key in the lock, I remembered the events of the night before. My brain literally said what was going on with the guy last night. Under the street light, I looked across at the home that the man was seemingly stood in front of. The strange thing was it was pitch black out. I couldn't see the house I had seen the night before. I was freaked out by this because I knew that I saw that man last night stood in front of a house on my street and now I couldn't even make out where he once was stood. I then figured out why I couldn't see him. There was no street or twilight anywhere near that house. I ran upstairs and looked out of the window thinking that my eyes had deceived me. But when I pulled back the curtain, my spine went cold. There was no street light opposite that house. I don't care what anyone says. I saw that man on that yellow street light in front of that house. I know it wasn't a dream either. I have still no idea how this happened. All I know is that my life went downhill fast after I laid eyes on that man. If anyone has any theories, I'm all ears. I can't get that night out of my head. This happened a long time ago when I went with some friends to a famous haunted location in my hometown. It was an abandoned hospital. We went in a group for guys. For girls, it was a long time ago now. I was much younger. Back then I was in my early 20s. We went there as a dare, a test of our collective courage, kind of like a ghost hunt. It was there where I experienced true horror for the first time in my life. Even now, when I think back on it, my spine goes ice-cold. Whenever I see any of the old gang who went with me to the abandoned hospital, we all recount what happened. I'm not the type to go in supposedly haunted places. I jump at my own shadow and I get so freaked whenever I watch a horror film. But being in a big group put my mind at ease. I wasn't too worried. On the drive to the abandoned hospital, everyone was so loud and excited. In the car there were 2 guys in the group A and B who said that they had the ability to sense spirits. They seemed to be the driving force in organizing this trip and they seemed very interested in getting there and looking around. The upbeat energy and conversation soon died off when we arrived and we were all stood in front of the twisted gates. We all seemed cowardly, especially the boys who were spearheading this trip. The 2 guys were muttering about how it was weird that good vibes had been sapped. I agreed. I felt that there was a bit of a strange atmosphere around the hospital. Out here in the tranquility of the mountains, there was something so off-putting about it, as if it was trying to keep you away like a warning to a potential trespass. Something told me this wasn't a good idea. Having said that, we all had went to such a big effort to come here and gear ourselves up for a paranormal adventure. It would be a shame if we went home without setting foot in there. So there we all stood, not one of us wanting to go in and every one of us wanting to go home, with none of us willing to say anything. We slowly approached the gates. We entered the hospital grounds through the gate and we slowly tried to build up the conversation again. The more we talked, the less we were focused on being scared. It was at this point, someone in the group said, "Hey, where's B?" I scanned the area and noticed that they were both still back at the gate. The rest of us were slightly concerned that the two who had instigated the whole trip and stated that they had the sixth sense were not coming with us. We had walked back and someone had called out, "What's the matter? What are you two scared of?" I imagined them to be cowering, huddled together. I was losing my faith in these guys. When I approached, I found that they were just stood side by side, one muttering to the other quietly, to the best of my recollection. This is what I heard. "Did you see that?" "Hey, you saw it too." I saw everything as I got closer. I saw that they had serious looks on their faces. Their friends had said that they had this kind of ability to sense the presence of ghosts and the paranormal. From a young age, they said that they were used to experiences like this and that they don't get scared anymore. I felt that a conversation like that was only intended to fuel our fears, and I thought that these two and their friends were just trying to scare me. I could smell a prank coming, so I just went up and asked them outright, "What did you guys see?" Then, to my surprise, I answered just a second ago. There was someone on the roof of the hospital. Then more people. They were all there. They were there. Then they were jumping one after another from the roof. There's so many of them. This made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. The roof was behind me, over my right shoulder, and I felt this insect-palpable sense of being watched, like some force was pulling me, urging me to look over my shoulder. I gave into that force and I looked. I turned and faced the hospital and I saw a black shadowy figure on the edge of the roof peering at me. I couldn't make out its eyes or any facial features. It was just a dreadful black shadow. I knew it was looking at me. I knew it sensed me. I was trapped. I couldn't do anything but watch it. Then silently jumped from the edge of the roof into the shadows below. Without thought or intention, I let out a scream. I think I wasn't the only one who saw it, but I was the only one who screamed. My legs were trembling with fear. I could barely keep myself upright. A then said, "This is as far as we should go. Let's leave now." Those of us who saw that figure or figures on the roof and those who didn't see anything at all were in unanimous agreement with her. We rushed back to the car and sped out of the mountainous woods. It took weeks for me to be able to sleep with the light off after that incident. I have never known a sense of horror like that. Since this story takes place when I was with my ex, we will call her for the sake of anonymity. After we split up, we still keep in touch. Sometimes we would call one another to check in and just have a laugh. Usually it was for no particular reason. But that night I sensed something different in her tone of voice. I seemed stressed out and she asked if I could come over. She had moved in with a friend recently and it seemed as if her friend was out. I was home alone and wanted me to come over. She hadn't invited me over since we split up. I thought I'd go for it. Since it sounded like a nice opportunity to see her again, I stopped at a convenience store to pick up her favorite sweets before heading over. On the drive over, I was wondering why she had called me and what the problem was. She didn't say anything except "come over as soon as you can." Thinking about it, her voice sounded more frightened than stressed out. I wondered for a moment if it was a trick or some kind of trap, but when I saw her waiting for me outside, I knew she wasn't faking anything. She looked terrified. I asked her what was wrong and she said that someone had been trying to kick a door in her apartment in. Let me just briefly describe the apartment's floor plan. When you go through the front door, you have to open another door to go through to the main rooms of the house, kind of like a tiny lobby. In a way, this was the door in question. I said it was being kicked or pummeled. I found this very hard to believe because in order to get to this door, an intruder would have to get through the front door that could obviously be locked. Plus you would hear someone coming right. But she said she had heard these kicking sounds moments after the house had been silent. There seemed to be no reason or pattern to this either. Let's just be clear for a second. I don't have any kind of ability to sense ghosts and I'm not a medium. I've never seen a ghost and I've never had any kind of experience which I could remotely relate to the paranormal I could see. She was really freaked out, so I stayed as calm as possible. It wasn't hard, as I was a bit of a skeptic. It's probably just an airflow thing with that room. I'm sure the air pressure in the room is making it seem as if the door is being kicked, when really the air is just being blown in it. Somehow I said, like the smart ass I am, I remembered that I was picking at the sweets I had brought over at the time. I said that the look on her face told me that she didn't believe my theory. Then, as if to confirm that I was wrong, I heard one loud dull thud against the door. There wasn't a TV or a radio on at the time. It was just me, and the visibly worried. Oh, as soon as I heard that thud, I jumped. I nearly hit the ceiling. It really startled me. Pa glared at me. I could tell this was disturbing for her. She began to tremble again. I went to check. I had to. I opened the door which leads to the front door. No one was there. The front door was shut, so there was no reason for this sudden bang. I started to get a little freaked out at this point. The first thing I did, which felt like the most logical thing I could in that moment, was go and check the front door was locked. I went back into the room with R to convince her that we were safe. Shortly after I returned to her, I heard an even bigger thud come from the same place. I remember I just stood there staring at it for a while. I swear I saw it vibrate with impact when I looked at it, as if it had just been kicked. "Who's that?" I called out as I threw open the door. No one there. The front door was still locked. No one could have gotten it. I heard her sobbing in the other room. At this point I had to reluctantly deny that what was going on was caused by a human. When my thoughts turned towards the paranormal, I started trembling too. Then the intercom doorbell rang. I was pretty surprised to open the door to see Alice's friend standing there. It seems as if she called her roommate. At the same time she called me. She said she had to explain something to us. We left the apartment together and after a very short walk, we arrived at a large national highway. She said that she heard from the neighbors that an incident had happened before she and I moved in. It was an incident involving a car crashing into a motorbike a while back. It was a hit and run in the dead of the night, with no other cars on the street and the motorcyclist being extremely banged up and unable to walk. He made his way off the highway by crawling. Who knows how long it took him to reach the first house he could find our new place. What was a short walk for us might have taken hours for the motorcyclist, who had been half crushed to death. When he finally reached the front door of the first house, he found he hammered on it with his remaining strength. No one must have been home, as his body was found the next morning. With a clenched fist resting against the glass, I turned a frightening shade of pale white. I kept silent. We then understood that was the source of the banging. I went home that night. Our roommate kept her company. Shortly after this, I moved out and into another apartment. We still keep in touch, but we never talk about that night. I think about that night all the time. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. What was the spirit of the motorcyclist trying to tell us that night? Or did he just not want to be forgotten? How long was I listening to that awful beat? I'm not sure I even understand it completely. Maybe it's not for me to understand. One thing for certain is, I try not to go anywhere near that house. And if it cannot be avoided, then I can't even bring myself to look at it. This happened when I was in the 5th grade. I was 10 or 11 years old. My classmates and I went on a field trip to an amusement park called Space World for about a week. I think it was for about a week. 2 of my cousins were on the trip. We had a great time. On our first day there, I was sharing a room with my two cousins, and I remember we were excitingly chatting about what we were going to do the next day. Then later we were all exhausted and the vibe had died down a little. I guess this was about 8 p.m. I heard a voice, not one of my cousin's voices. A girl's voice. "Hey," her voice called out. I replied I was a little surprised that she wanted to chat. But since we were on a school trip and the hotel was a budget one, I guessed that everyone in her room was too tired to chat to her. She seemed nice and we chatted through the wall for about an hour. It must have been a very thin wall. I must have fallen asleep too. We had a long day of riding the rides. So anyway, the next day I woke up early, eager to explore Space World theme park once again, and also eager to meet the girl who I had been chatting with the night before. So naturally I was the first one out of our room. I heard her voice coming from the left-hand side last night, but when I left our hotel I realized that we were the last hotel room on the left. There wasn't a hotel room there. Next to our room was nothing but a staircase. Judging on the position of my room in relation to the height of the stairs, I can safely say that there was no way someone could be tall enough to press their mouth to the wall and chat with me like I heard that girl did last night. They have to be over 8 foot tall. So I just stood there at 8 staring at the descending staircase on our floor, wondering or maybe praying for a logical answer, or at least an answer which wouldn't keep me up at night. What made matters worse was when I recounted what she had said to me last night. "Hey, why don't you come next door?" I said at the time that I was too tired and I just wanted to go to bed. I figured we would have time to hang out in the morning. What would have happened if I left my room that night? I heard later from some older school friends that the last room on the left in that hotel was known to be haunted. Legend has it, a girl was jumping around on the beds with her friends and misjudged her final jump, resulting in her landing awkwardly on her neck. And well, I guess you can figure out the rest. When I pressed my friends for more information, they said she had passed away when she was in the same year as us at school. It seems that, regardless of the rumors, something tragic happened in that room. The weird thing about all of this wasn't the rumors or the fact that I had spoken with some phantom girl that nobody else had. It was one of the photos my friend took on the trip. I am standing at the end of a line of kids in my class and there appears to be a pale hand left shoulder. I need to see it again, but I haven't heard from that kid in years. If that's the case and it is something otherworldly, then I don't mind. I like to think that she followed me out of the hotel because she was lonely. I spoke with her and I don't think that she's a bad spirit. Since that day, nothing weird has happened. I'm sure that she's not a bad spirit. I just want to pray for her soul. I don't know how to set her free. This summer I bought an apartment I had been dying to buy for so long. It wasn't new, but it was just what I wanted to own. Something for myself was very moving. I felt so proud. It was amazing because it heralded the end of long train rides every day to work. It was relieving to know that I wouldn't be governed by the last train home. I could now commute to work, which was just 1,000 times more convenient. I don't have any plans on getting married. I don't have a special someone in my life, but getting something absolute like a place to call my own until I sold it is something really great. I had been living in my new place for a couple of weeks when something had begun to annoy me. It's so hot during summer I have to leave the window open to get the ventilation. My only issue with that is I keep smelling cigarette smoke. My apartment is a corner room on the east side of the building, so my guess is that other residents are stepping out on the balcony to smoke on the left-hand side. A year before I moved here I was a smoker, so back then I wouldn't have minded, but I quit. It wasn't good for me. It made me want to light up. I couldn't have that. Plus, I was certain that smoking was prohibited on the balconies in this apartment block. I felt like I should complain, but I was the new person in the block. I didn't know what kind of trouble might come my way if I put in a complaint this early with my neighbors. I thought I would just shut the window and crank the AC. Just let it go and stop finding fault. I thought after a couple of days I got a call from the building management. I honestly thought that they were just checking in to see how I was doing. But they called to report a complaint. The person who lives next door complained I had been smoking on the balcony. I remember the person who called me said, it's just that there are families here with babies and smoke isn't good for kids. Right? I'm sure you understand. So no more smoking. Okay. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't smoking. So I was naturally annoyed at being accused of this. I just said I don't smoke and hung up. It was annoying. But I figured out that the person next door wasn't the smoker, so the smoke had to be coming from someplace else. Maybe above or below. The issue was unresolved. But the days crept by. I kept my window shut. But it got to the point where it was too hot to have it open. And as soon as I opened it, there it was, the smell of tobacco. It drifted into my room almost instantly. It was obvious that someone was smoking nearby. But rather than start a witch hunt, I thought I would leave it to the building management to figure out. I mean, how could I complain? They thought I was the guy who was smoking. I didn't want the hassle. Time went by and later I discovered something strange. The order I hung the laundry up and it changed. I set out my jacket and trousers side by side. I know I did. And when I went to retrieve them, they were the opposite ends of the clothesline. I looked at it and thought, can I honestly say this is a prank or something that a gust of wind did? Why would someone move? It was around this point that I figured out that something creepy was going on. I could let someone off if they smoked on the balcony. I honestly didn't care. But if someone was messing with my clothes, then we had a problem. But the question lingered, why would someone climb over my balcony just to mess with me? Were they doing this when I was at work? What was the deal here and what was the point? My apartment is on the 8th floor. Was it Spider-Man? Did he have a problem with me? Moreover, nothing was ever stolen. I've heard of underwear thieves in Japan, but my phones and brass were always left untouched. Just my day laundry was being moved. What annoyed more than the smell of tobacco and my clothes being moved around was the fact that this had no logical answer. No matter how many times I thought about it, the further from the conclusion I became. I decided to seek the advice of a friend who is into the paranormal and the occult. He said that I should leave out some salt on addition, some sake wine in a glass. I'm not a believer in the paranormal, but I would take any suggestion I could get. At this point, the whole thing was really stressing me out. The next morning I went out on the balcony and checked my salt, and the second I couldn't believe my eyes. The salt looked hard and dirty and the sake had turned a murky blackish color. What the hell is going on with my balcony? I thought. I called my friend. I needed some advice. I told him what happened with the salt and sake. He told me that I have a very bad spirit on my hands and it seems to like the balcony. I hadn't ever experienced anything paranormal before. I was completely taken aback. Do you know who lived here before you? He asked. I didn't know. I just bought the place from the realtor. Since the realtor didn't mention anything suspicious about the place, I just assumed it was a great deal and a great apartment. I thought for sure that the former resident must know something about these strange goings-on. I contacted the realtor and said I had a question for the former resident. They said that if I had something to ask, I could ask them and then they would ask him and then I would get my answer. That sounded super long-winded, and I didn't really want to tell them about my paranormal experiences. So I told them not to worry about bothering the former resident. Then the realtor said this. Oh, by the way, the former resident said something interesting before he moved out. He asked me to tell the next person who moves here to leave an offering near the window on a plate. I did just that. I bought some sweets and something called a kamidama to help keep the spirit happy. The smell of tobacco went away and the laundry stopped being messed with. After that, it's really hard to tell what has been going on in this apartment. But one thing is now a constant. I leave an offering daily, without exception. The Shokin Name Park is one of Japan's national parks. It's in Tokyo, between Toshigawa and Ekeizumi. Before there was a park, there was the Tachikawa Airfield, famous, of course, during World War II. The park is 40 times the size of the Tokyo Dome Arena and is considered a green oasis in the metropolitan city. Way back when I was a student at university, I landed a part-time job in the Shoakinen Park, surveying the number of visitors. The job couldn't be easier. All I had to do was sit in a chair and click a counter every time a visitor walked past and entered the park. It was mind-numbingly simple. Little did I know that one of the strangest experiences which has ever happened to me would take place while I worked there. It happened during the early onset of winter. It was pretty cold. I think it was around 4 p.m. at a guest. The sky was a shade of dark crimson red. I was in a pretty decent mood as my shift was about to end. A gentle wind was blowing at the time. It had been really busy that morning. Well, right up until that point actually. Then a welcome lull in the influx of visitors came with all the commotion of the day. It was hard to believe that there was a hiatus. But there was one. It felt odd. Something didn't seem quite right. I felt a bit uncomfortable. A football came scuffing along the ground towards my feet. I stopped it with the inside of my foot and looked around. I couldn't see anyone playing football in the park nearby. I don't know how else to explain it, but I felt like I was the last person on earth for a moment. It was just me, completely alone in a world devoid of humans. What the hell was this? I wondered. An indescribable fear gripped me and it wouldn't let go. It was quickly joined by a buzzing sense of anxiety. While I was studying the football before me, I saw a shadow grow behind. The owner of that shadow seemed to be a little boy. Perhaps he was the owner of the football too. I wondered for a moment. I instinctively went to turn and face him, but something inside told me not to. Something told me to look away. I just stared at the grass and watched his shadow. The shadow didn't move an inch. A second or so passed. Then that gust of wind blew once again. And then a family passed in front of me. I clicked my counter in my hand 3 times without realizing I was really freaked out by this and only realized it later when the number had gone up. I still remember the number it was on. After this experience, 8, 4, 5, 9, I checked over my shoulder and the boy's shadow had disappeared. There was no one there. No owner of the football in sight. I think in that moment I was somewhere else. Be it somewhere in history or on another plane of consciousness. I simply was not there. Hello everyone. Today I will tell you ghost stories from different regions of Japan, contributed by netizens. As we look into ghost stories from different regions of Japan, we begin in Tokyo, where most travelers would likely begin. This entry is called the Shadow Woman with Nishiere Underpass. This experience was submitted by a woman in her 40s and was submitted on the 21st of April 2023, but it takes place on a cold January evening last month. Something really strange and frightening happened when I passed through Nishiere Underpass. For those who don't know, the underpass is in Arakawa. It's a ward in Tokyo and it's just a simple underpass. It's used to allow pedestrians to cross beneath the train tracks. It's fairly clean in there and the lighting isn't bad. But you would be forgiven for seeing it as an underpass and little more than that. But to us locals it's more than an underpass. It's quite famous. They say that the underpass is haunted. All the locals have heard the stories. Hi Jay. Here I was actually able to find the location. If you look at the screen now, you can see the exact underpass in question. I will drop the location in the description if you want to see more of the area. Hope this helps provide context. Anyway, back to the story. Apparently there used to be a railroad crossing above ground instead of the underpass. But due to a tragic accident it was deemed that it was far too unsafe to cross the tracks above ground. Legend has it that there was a tragic accident involving a mother and her child. They were trying to cross the tracks when they shouldn't have been and they were run down by a passing train. Some say that this tragic event was the reason why the underpass was commissioned. Some aren't so sure, but I definitely think it has something to do with the council's decision. The train tracks are all fenced off now, and we all use the underpass or alternative crossing methods. Us locals never forgot about the tragic accident that happened, and it wasn't long before the rumors about the underpass began to spread around the area. There were reported ghost sightings in the underpass. There are these curved mirrors down there which allow you to see if people are coming so you don't collide with them. You know, oncoming foot traffic legend has it that you can see a mother and her child appear in those mirrors. Some say that a shadowy silhouette of an old woman can also be seen walking around down there at night. I never knew if there was much truth in these reported ghost sightings, but I knew that some locals in the area wouldn't go anywhere near that underpass because they said it gave off bad vibes. As for me, I didn't really buy into the haunted underpass stories, but for some reason I also didn't go anywhere near it. I don't know if that was a subconscious choice or not, but when I got off at Nishai station I used an intersection a little further away. Anyways, last month I set off for work. I was on the night shift, so by the time I left home it was already dark and gloomy. It was about 5 p.m. I actually left a little later than I wanted to, so I was a bit worried about missing my train. I needed to save some time, so I hesitantly decided to use the Nishirai underpass that evening. Using it would be quite the shortcut and I didn't feel like I had much choice. I realized, as I was heading down the slope, that it had been a long time since I had used this underpass. I have to be honest, I was a little scared at that point. The rumors and the legends were swirling around my mind, but because I was in such a hurry, I was able to push the feeling of fear to the side for a few moments. I decided to go straight on and not look around. Just get in and get out as quickly as possible was my attitude. The length of the underpass was about 15 m or 16 yards. The underpass is well maintained and there are lights down there. It's surprisingly bright and there isn't any graffiti in there either. It's not an intimidating place to walk through. That's what I'm getting at. If you read up on haunted locations in Japan, they always seem to be these rundown buildings or desolate shrines where everything seems unsafe and broken and there's graffiti scrawled on the walls. But the Nisha underpass was nothing like that. As I was passing through, I was thinking to myself, why haven't I used this in so long? I can save so much time this way. I was over halfway into the underpass at that point. As I was about to round the corner to begin my ascent to the streets above, I took one step out of the mouth of the underpass, and that was the moment that I heard something. It was a high-pitched noise, not too dissimilar from a cat meowing or a baby crying. I think if I had heard that noise whilst I was alone in the underpass, I would have been freaked out. But since I was now above ground, well, kind of, I didn't hesitate to look behind me. I spun around to see a woman stood at the foot of the stairs I had just climbed to leave the underpass. She looked to be between the ages of 20 and 30. She was wearing a modern-looking skirt. But the most striking thing about this woman was the aura she gave off. It was as if the moment I had laid eyes on her, I knew that there was something deep down troubling her. She looked like depression and sadness personified. Another very strange thing was the fact that I could barely see this woman. She was almost shadowy. There was a very strong sense of darkness that came with seeing this woman. At first glance, I thought that she was just an ordinary woman, so I didn't really pay her much attention and I just hurried along out of the underpass. I was going to be late for work after all. I made it to the station and I caught my train on time. My worries about being late began to subside as I took a seat on my train. I relaxed a little, but since my mind was no longer preoccupied, I thought about the woman I saw in the underpass. She suddenly came back to me. I could see her in my mind's eye, stood there at the foot of the stairs looking up at me. Something didn't seem to add up to me. It was the middle of January. Why wasn't she wearing a coat? It was freezing outside. She must have been so cold. Another thought came to me when I was passing through the underpass. Why didn't I hear her footsteps following behind me? How did she appear out of nowhere? That high-pitched crying sound. Where did that come from too? The more I thought about it, the more I thought that it sounded like a child rather than an animal. I started to feel very uncomfortable and creeped out. The one thing that really stood out to me as a decisive point was the overall darkness the woman gave off. The underpass was bright, yet she stood there looking like a living shadow. I could barely see her, when I should be able to see her perfectly. I suddenly got goosebumps on the train. Chills were racing all over my body. Was that woman a living person? Were the legends about the underpass being haunted true? I'm not sure if I can answer those questions, but one thing I can tell you is I've never walked through a niche underpass again. You wouldn't catch me dead anywhere near it. Next, we're headed to Armory. This one was submitted by a woman in her 30s and this surfaced back online in November 2020. Until a few days ago, I was a university student living in Aoul City, Houlor Prefecture. I had heard about various haunted locations in my prefecture, but I never dared to go and investigate them. I didn't dare set foot anywhere near something remotely creepy. But that all changed around the time that the summer heat had managed to ease up and the colors of the trees were turning to beautiful autumnal shades. Oranges, deep reds and golden leaves were everywhere. Some of my university friends and I were eating out in a local restaurant, and we spoke about how there must be a beautiful view from Jura Bridge at this time of year. Hi Jay. Here I managed to find the bridge once again. If you look at the screen, you'll see an image of the bridge in autumn. I will also drop the link in the description box for this one too. Although if you want to go on the street view, it's not autumn, but you get the general idea anyway. Back to the story. I knew that the bridge was a famous tourist destination, so I didn't really want to go at first. But all my friends really seemed interested in heading out there, so I said yes. In the end, in the car on the way to Jeokura Bridge, I was doing some research. I was looking up the bridge and I kept seeing words like haunted spot popping up in the search results. I wasn't aware of its reputation as a haunted location, so I clicked on one of the links. Jura Bridge stands over 122 m tall, and due to its height, it has become a place where troubled people come to end things. No numbers are reported on how many people have thrown themselves off of that bridge, but it is said to be a lot. There's a small urban legend that goes if you look down over the bridge, you'll be dragged down below those 122 m by the spirits of the ones who ended things there. I've since heard that some locals refuse to even go anywhere near it. You can also find out lots about that bridge online if you look for it. I was looking at all the creepy stuff and I noticed that my friend who was sat next to me on the back seats in the car was peering over at my phone, and she looked at my phone and I saw some concern in her eyes a little about my friend. She said that she had kind of spiritual powers. I don't know if that's how to phrase it, but basically it means that she can see ghosts. She seemed to be a little nervous once she saw what I was looking up. Despite her looking a little concerned, the overall vibe that day was one of excitement. It wasn't like we all of a sudden had become apprehensive or dropped interest in going. We were still going to go and have a great time as far as we were concerned. A little while later we pulled into our destination. We had arrived at Jeokura Bridge. There didn't seem to be all that many tourists out that day, or we managed to pick the perfect time period to arrive. We were all really happy. We knew that we could enjoy the day at our pace rather than being rushed by an oncoming mass of tourists. I looked over at my friend and she still looked a little apprehensive. She didn't seem to be matching the energy the rest of us were putting out there. I was sure that she would change her energy once we were outside and enjoying the scenery. It's only a short walk from the car park to the actual bridge. The tourists we passed by had big smiles on their faces and they looked like they had a great day. Even before I got to the bridge, I was amazed by the scenery. It truly is a breathtaking sight. There was nothing but a gorgeous sea of red leaves, for as far as the eye could see all around me in 360. Everyone whipped out their smartphones and we were taking photos and videos. But that friend of mine, who I sat on the back seats of the car with, wasn't joining in. She wandered towards the railing slowly. She wasn't taking a photo. She seemed to be in a kind of daze. I thought that it was strange. Something seemed off about her. So I called out to her. I shouted her name. It seemed obvious to me that her demeanor had slightly changed. She ignored my calls to her and she continued to head towards the guardrail with a blank look on her face, without responding to any of us. Others in the group had begun to shout her name too. She stretched her arm out to the sky and they made some kind of weird gesture, as if her arm had been pulled downwards, and then began to turn her head down, as well as if to look underneath the bridge. I guess that we all didn't really know what to do. I mean, we just stood there gawking at the scene, kind of wondering what would happen next. She did something that required immediate action on our part. She leaned over the rail as if she was trying to get a better look of under the bridge. The weight that she had leaned forward with was greater than the weight she had on the ground, so she began to slowly go forward, almost to the point of no return. We all raced over to her and grabbed her and pulled her back. We all pulled and pulled, but despite the fact that there were 3 of us pulling with all our might, it seemed as if we weren't strong enough to stop her from falling. It was almost as if something had a hold of her and was pulling her over the bridge. We managed to pull her back, though fully over the guardrail, and I was so relieved when I saw her feet landing on the bridge, because I knew that she was safe. I was closest to her face as we pulled her, and for a moment her eyes flitted and she began to mutter something incomprehensible. She scared the life out of me that day. As soon as we had her feet safely on the ground, we all decided to rush back to the car. The other tourists must have thought the worst of us. I don't know. Our friend looked as if she had thoughts of ending it all, and it must have been a sight, I guess. But that wasn't how we saw it. She showed no signs that night. Just to be safe, we all decided to stay together to keep an eye on her. She was very unresponsive and devoid of all any kind of emotion. It was truly disturbing to witness come the morning. She was her usual self, again, though it was like a switch had been flipped overnight. I asked her about what she remembered we did yesterday, and she said that she remembered. We drove to the Jura Bridge and we arrived at the parking lot, but after that she claimed she has no recollection. We were all stunned by her admission. I mean, how could she not remember anything that had happened beyond us pulling into the car park? Then she gasped. It was like something had suddenly come back to her. She grabbed her left arm and glanced around the room, and her face is in shock. Or was it panic? She timidly lifted the sleeve, and I wasn't ready for what I was about to see. Her skin had finger-shaped bruises on it, as if she had been grabbed very vigorously by someone. Realizing this caused her to start shaking with fear. Some of my friends were beginning to panic too. I just couldn't believe what I was witnessing. She said that she was beginning to remember fragments of yesterday. In a shaky voice, she sounded as if she was on the verge of tears, and as she looked down below the bridge, she said that she saw a face coming out the pitch darkness. She saw a man with despair and hatred in his eyes. She could sense it from him. It was as if it was coming out of every pore in his body. He grabbed her, and he was the one who was trying to pull her off the edge of the railing downwards. She also said that he was covered in blood. Now I can't confirm what she saw, but I know what I saw. And that day I saw one of my friends go into a kind of trance-like state and nearly throw themselves from Jayokura Bridge. I also saw those horrible dark marks on her arm the following morning. Needless to say, we never went back sticking with our Morty here. I don't know if many people might have heard of this one, so I'm sharing it. I live in Aoor, and there was a small local publishing company that put out this great book a long time ago, called The Ghost Stories of Ao. I want to share one with you. There might be different versions of this tale out there, but I think that I've covered the main parts correctly. Years and years ago, there was this famine in Sugaryu, and a woman was wandering in the open fields in search of food. She smelled the scent of rice cooking and went right on up to the house where the alluring smell was coming from. She looked through an open door and saw a pot of rice cooking. She noticed that there wasn't anyone in sight either. The poor starving woman couldn't resist. She raced over to the pot and began to devour the rice. The owner of the home, perhaps hearing sounds in his kitchen, raced over from another room and caught the woman red-handed. He had a sharpened bamboo spear at the ready. Presumably this was his weapon, and he snapped her in the chest with it. He took out all of his rage on the emaciated, starving woman and ended her life in his kitchen. But before the woman passed over, she spoke to him. "I know it's wrong to steal, but it's taking my life, right? It seems to be done now. But before I go, know that I curse this house and your family name, and my curse won't end until your lineage has suffered, as I have." The legend goes that every child that was born into that man's home was born deformed, and only a few managed to outgrow childhood. Today, 8 generations have come and gone in his name, and few have grown up without issues and challenges. His descendants live at a place in our Mori called Fujisaki too. One is blind and another suffers from alopecia. Apparently, the book I read this from was put out in 1973. So perhaps he still has some descendants out there living through the curse that the starving woman put on his family. I'm not sure. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Is it true or false? Who knows? I just knew I wanted to share it with you anyways. This next experience takes us to Iwate Prefecture and was submitted by a woman in her 50s in August of 2020, but it takes place years beforehand. This happened when I was in my 20s. I used to work at a nursery school in Iwate Prefecture. It was kind of like a daycare really. We looked after children until their parents came to collect them after work. The latest the children left would be about 7:30. And then our staff members would clean down and get everything ready for the next day. On the night that this experience took place, all the staff members were called into work for a team meeting. After the students left for the day, we gathered together in one of the little nursery rooms. After sharing some information and discussions on students and upcoming events, we began to get ready to leave for the night. But a sudden noise stopped us. We heard the sound of footsteps running down the hallway. It clearly sounded like a child was running. We were also shocked to hear that, because it was only supposed to be us employees here at that time of night. Everyone in the room went quiet. We all stood there listening and exchanging glances of disbelief. I thought, oh, maybe one of the children hadn't been picked up and perhaps one of them had been hiding from us. But it just seemed too impossible. Though no parent had ever been this late to pick up their child. It just didn't happen. Plus, how could one of us not realize that a child hadn't been picked up or even failed to find a hiding child in our very small daycare? Before I could think of what to do next, I heard those footsteps running back in the opposite direction. This time there was another noise. We had bags hanging from pegs out in the hallway. They were changing bags. For some of the children, it sounded like someone had smacked each bag with their hand as they ran past. I knew that sounded well. We discouraged children from doing that. I can't tell you how many times a day I said to the kids, don't hit those bags. They'll fall down. Plus, it was super annoying if you were in the middle of a class and you heard that sound really jarring. This all happened very quickly. By the way, we didn't have a chance to say anything to each other. Whilst we stood in silence in our room, we were sure that the entrance door was locked and all the children had gone home. And then a few more seconds of silence passed and I heard one of my coworkers ask, "What's this?" "A ghost." We all looked at one another in shock again. We really didn't know what to think, since these were everyday noises that we were hearing. We were really scared of what was happening. I heard myself say it's not one of my students. There was no basis for me saying that, but judging the situation solely on the sounds I had just heard, I felt very strongly that it wasn't one of my students. Something just felt different. Back then we had a coworker who claimed to have a strong sense of spiritual understanding. She said that she had the ability to sense the presence of ghosts. She was the first to open the door and investigate. Our daycare was dark and silent. The classrooms were still and the whole place seemed to have taken on a new atmosphere since the moment we heard those little footsteps running up and down the hall. There was no one in the hallway. There was no one but us in the school that night. And we knew that deep down, no child was playing pranks. We were experiencing something perhaps otherworldly. But the woman who claimed to be able to interact with spirits said that she heard a faint, childlike voice whispered, "Let's play." We stayed silent, straining our ears, trying to figure out what on earth was happening and to test if we could hear anything. I swear, I heard a little voice, giggle, coming from right in front of me, a bodiless voice in the quiet of the night. The spiritual woman then said she felt sorry for the presence that was with us in the daycare that night. She said that he had met with sad circumstances. "You can't stay here. You have somewhere else to go, don't you?" she said out loud. Since the moment she said those words, nothing further happened. No phantom footsteps or bodiless voices. We were all unsure of what we experienced that night, but those footsteps we heard, were they? The footsteps of a wandering spirit, a child perhaps. If one person said that they heard it and told me about it, I think I would be ready to argue that they might have been just imagining things. If you work with kids all day, the noises that they make can stay with you after hours. Believe me, but we all experienced it. So I don't think any of us can say that we were hearing things that night or imagining it. The spiritual co-worker of mine said at a later date the following: perhaps some unfortunate child who passed over came to our daycare in the hope to play with someone his age. And I got to say, that hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt something closer to pity rather than fear after she said that I prayed for that little boy. I don't care even if there's a logical explanation, because I just can't seem to find it. I hope that little one isn't wandering around alone anymore, and I hope his soul is at rest. Or, better still, I hope he's up there with more playmates. Then he knows what to do with for. Hello everyone. Today I will tell you 5 horror stories that netizens have personally experienced. I heard this one from a close friend of mine. He said it would be fine to share it as long as I kept his identity anonymous. By the way, he's an avid hiker. He loves the outdoor life, and we often go mountain climbing and camping together. So I will switch to the first person and tell you about his experience as if it were my own. I had wanted to climb a very snowy mountain in my region for a while, so I got together some friends. We made about a party of 5. We researched the climb and figured it would take us about 3 days and 2 nights to get to the summit and back down. The first day of the climb was difficult. The temperature was below freezing, and the terrain was very rocky. We ended up expending a lot of our energy. It got dark at about 4 p.m., making progress difficult. We pushed on, though, and managed to set up base camp, and we pitched our tents. We made it to a flat area which was kind of like a field, fresh snow covered. All in all, we could see was black and white, the sky being black and the ground being snow white. It didn't take me too long to drop off to sleep, despite the fact that I was shivering in my sleeping bag. I did, however, wake up. In the middle of the night, I heard a voice outside my tent. I was groggy and I almost thought that it was morning, but I couldn't see any light. I thought it just could have been one of the people I was hiking with. I lay there static in the dark trying to get back to sleep, and then I heard the voice again. I heard it say, "Hey." I was very confused at that point, because to me that voice didn't sound like it belonged to anyone in our group. And there was another off-putting thing. The voice almost sounded like it was coming from the direction we had just climbed up. The voice was coming from the descent, if you know what I mean. I checked my watch and it was past 2 a.m. I wondered if someone had been injured, another hiker perhaps, so I woke up our whole party. We lit our lanterns and turned on our flashlights, and we called out in the direction that I heard the voice calling from. "Is anyone out there? Are you hurt?" we called out. The only response we got was the howl of the wind rustling through the trees and the gentle sound of snowfall. It was as if the moment I had called out, the voice stopped calling. I didn't hear it again that night, but it played on my mind. I slept very lightly as there was an ever-tightening knot of concern growing in my stomach. It was weird, but we had to move on. I guess that I must have been hearing things. You can hear all kinds of strange things out in the wild. It really could have been anything. Well, in the first one, that's what I thought at the time. That's what I tried to convince myself of. However, I knew deep down it sounded way too human for me to mistake it as an animal. The following day we continued our climb. We covered a lot of ground. We crossed several peaks and pitched our tents again when the sun began to descend. We were in a prime position to aim for the summit. In the morning I got ready for some sleep. I was hoping to catch a couple of extra hours that I missed out on the night before I ended up waking up again. Though this time it was because I needed to take a whiz. I got up, headed out of the tent into the freezing cold to try and find a place to relieve myself. It was pitch black, but the blanket of snow at my feet helped me to at least see where I was going. The moon was pretty full and it was just jutting out from behind the summit of the mountain. I stopped to take a look at it and that was when I noticed something. I tried my best to get a good look, but it was difficult. The snow was obscuring my view, but there was definitely something out there near the summit. It looked like there was a light flickering in the distance, maybe the light of a lantern or small fire, or something. I decided to call out. I shouted, "Hey!" The light then disappeared, as if in reaction, but then something different happened. I heard voices coming from that direction. Their calls carried on the wind. I heard them calling back to me, "Hey! Hey, hey, hey!" I shouted back, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need any help? Is anyone out there?" Stuff like that. I did so because it sounded like the same voice I had heard the night before, but the voices never answered. I couldn't consider it a coincidence anymore. All I could do was head back to my tent and my sleeping bag. Something was trying to call me. I know it was. It was trying to separate me from my party. The mountains are scary, especially in the dark, but thankfully nothing much else happened. We climbed the summit and made it back down without any further issue. While I was up there, I did look for any signs of fires or lanterns, etc. But I couldn't find anything. I do wonder what was calling me. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. And what might have happened if I went in search of the owner of that voice? This happened last winter, and I haven't been able to speak to anyone about it, apart from my closest friend. I feel like sharing it here, just in case someone else has experienced something similar. It's a bit out there, but stay with me. It all started with a dream, and then I had the same dream again in quick succession. It was like a dream of an acquaintance I hadn't made yet. I know that doesn't really make much sense, but in my dream I followed someone. I couldn't tell you why I did that. Maybe that's because that's the very nature of dreams. They're supposed to be abstract, aren't they? So I followed this person because it made sense to me in the dream. They seemed to know where they were going and it made sense for me to follow. I use the term person here because I'm unsure of the gender. It's a dream. It's all unclear. Yet I have a strange sense of déjà vu. The person ahead seemed to notice me. I even get glanced at over the shoulder, but they don't seem to mind me following. We walked through a lively town into a desolate area. It appeared to be some kind of former railroad line. I remember this part pretty clearly as I walked along the railway tracks. There was a fence to my left and a little further on there was an overpass. There looked to be a pedestrian bridge which would allow people to cross over that railroad down further along the tracks. The line seemed to elevate a little, but we turned off at that point. I followed the person in front as we crossed the bridge over the tracks and into an overgrown area. We brushed through the frozen, looking overgrown plants and weeds and out into a desolate graveyard, all the while the leader never looked back at me. The follower. It was At that point I started to feel scared. It was as if the dream was at the tipping point and it was about to plunge into nightmare. Suddenly the graveyard was gone and all around was nothing but white empty fields of snow. Then the person I followed quickly leaves, but I don't follow. I understand that I'm to be left behind. I'm unable to move. My feet have sunk into the snow. I'm stuck in the snow. And that's when I woke up the second time. I had that exact same dream. Something else happened. I woke up the point like last time where I get stuck in the snow in the white fields. But then I was able to get back to sleep. When I went back to sleep, I was back at the bridge and I was all alone. Someone called out to me from afar, pleading with me not to go any further. The voice was distant and it echoed. I didn't recognize the voice either. I hated that dream. I felt quite disgusted by it. To be perfectly honest, I wanted to remember it, though for some strange reason, as it did feel like a second-hand memory to me. So, for the first time in my life, I started a dream diary. I also prayed. My family have always been quite religious, so it wasn't life-altering for me to pray. I prayed for myself and I prayed for the person in my dream. I prayed that nothing bad would happen to either of us. I didn't have the dream again. After that, about 2 weeks later, I went on a walk with my friend and we went along the Yamanote line from Iisu, Shibuya. I had never walked that route before my friend and I would often head out on walks for our health or just to chat. I think we are both restless kind of people, so walking and talking for us is miles better than sitting and having a coffee during the walk. Something dawned on me: the scenery. It all looked familiar. It looked like what I had seen in my dream. On the left of the Yamanote line there is an overpass that takes you over the tracks. That looks like the pedestrian bridge from my dream. The track seemed to elevate to beyond the bridge. I have to admit I felt a little scared when I saw that it was like reliving those dreams I had. I didn't know what to think. One part of me was screaming, "Get out of there." But the other part of me was telling me that I was overreacting and I needed to find out more. I even mentioned this to the friend I was with. I told her all about the dream I had. I think that it was freaking her out. I could see it on her face as she tried to feign interest and hide fear. We slowly walked closer, but we didn't get very far. We both let out a scream as we approached a telephone pole and a vending machine. There was a paper note there with some brushstroke writing on it, and it read, "See scenery from a dream." We both stood there, baffled and horrified, watching our labored breath fall in front of our faces. I haven't been back to that area since. I don't think I'll ever go back there again. And one thing for sure is you'll never catch me crossing that bridge. That bridge from my dream. It was all too scary to be a coincidence. That's pretty much all I could say about this experience. I know it isn't the scariest. It feels similar to Diabo, or perhaps it's all part of some kind of prophecy. At least I know there's one other person who's had the same dream as me. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Has anyone else seen anything similar in their dreams, which has appeared then in reality? Hi Jay. Here I'm planning to go to Japan next year. I'll be in that area in February. What do you think? Should I try and find out if that note is still there? I know it's a hell of a long shot since this story surfaced online in 2020, but I can't write to show you the scenery of a dream. At least you know the bridge, the tracks, etc. That might be something. If this generates a bit of buzz, I will try my best to go and have a look. Who knows, maybe I'll even make it to that graveyard. I once matched with someone on a dating app and it completely put me off ever using apps like that again. At first we got on quite well enough for us to have a date, but something about him and me just didn't feel like a great fit. Unfortunately, the reason why I didn't think we would ever become an item was because he came across as a pretty weird dude. He was a little bit intense. You know, a bit stocky. Full on. Unfortunately, he already had my information, so I would sometimes hear from him and keep in touch with him via an app called Line. I felt that if I blocked him, Something bad might happen. He might fly off the handle. This guy had this intensity that was just haunting. I didn't want to provoke him. I know that sounds so dumb, but that is how I felt. Eventually, I stopped opening his messages. I just left them unread. After a while, he got the picture and stopped contacting me. I know it's not nice to give someone the cold shoulder like that, but he kind of left me no other choice. If I ever did reply to him, he would pounce on it and bombard me with messages at all hours of the day and night. He stopped messaging me, and I thought that would be the end of things. I assumed that he had given up and moved on. However, one day, during a particularly cold winter in my city, something bad happened. It was freezing. As I walked home from work, I didn't think that I could feel any colder, but when someone jumped out in front of me from some darkened alley, my heart felt like it was turning to ice. It was him, the guy I went on a date with months ago. So there I was confronted by the creep I had thought I had successfully avoided. I was really scared. He just stood there in my path and didn't say anything. He was glaring at me, and I was shocked into a silence. I didn't really know what to say at first, but after a couple of awkward seconds I asked him what he was doing here, and he said something like, "What's so bad about the lovers' meeting? I mean, it's only natural. I come around to see you. If I can't reach you by the phone, right shows I care." What he had said made no sense. It had been a good few months since we had spoken, and even longer since we had our one and only date. It made no sense at all. I felt that he was obviously crazy, and then I thought about getting as far away from him as humanly possible. So fight or flight kicked in, and I just ran. All I wanted to do was go home and forget about the weird encounter with that guy. But I realized that if he had met me on my route home, then there was every chance that he might know where I lived. I realized that it would have been totally dumb to go straight home. So I stood there as it snowed, cowering in some disused building's archway, frantically thinking about what to do next. After the adrenaline subsided, the solution was obvious. I needed to go to the police. So I went to my local cone. IJ. Here, a cone is a station for police officers built at key areas in the city, such as in front of train stations or in shopping districts. The word CBN literally means taking turns to keep watch, because police officers are stationed there at all times. And these officers, they take turns, shifts, or kota in Japanese, to keep watch, which is then in Japanese about 24 hours a day. They make walking home at night feel pretty safe, and I have been grateful of their help a couple of times in Japan. Anyway, back to the story. After I made my report to the officers, they told me that they would patrol my area just to be on the safe side. I felt reassured, but not exactly safe, and, if I'm completely honest, after that night I turned into a bit of a recluse. For a while, I developed an acute fear of leaving the house. 3 months or so went by, and there was no sign of that. One date, wonder I matched with online. So I slowly but surely regained some confidence. I went outside by myself for the first time in a long while. I was relying on the help of my friends and family. Up until then, I planned on heading to the supermarket. I knew the route and I knew it was close. The corn was nearby, and I felt it was a relatively safe route. The word of a lie. I got about 20 paces up my street, and then I heard a voice call out to me from across the street. I was addressed by my name. It wasn't an or a cat call or anything like that. This person knew me. Here is roughly what the guy shouted at me. "Hey Kenna, I've been waiting for you." He crossed the road with a light jog and stood a couple of paces behind me with a completely straight poker face. "Hey, you know you didn't need to call the cops on me, right? Don't you think that was a little mean, sweetheart?" I was so scared that I couldn't make a sound. I knew I had to run, and I'm so happy that I chose that room. I did to venture out for the first time, as I knew exactly how to get to the Corbin. I ran there and I reported what happened. I have to say, life so far has been pretty incident-free since that second reporting, but that was how it was before. I feel like I've been led back into a false sense of security. I feel like it might be the calm before the storm again. Winter is rolling around and the nights are getting darker when the snow begins to fall. I'm scared. All those memories of being stuck will return to me again. When our second child, my son, was 4 years old, we decided to move from Yokohama to my husband's hometown in Tohoku. I searched online for ages trying to find a nice place to live, and I managed to find somewhere nice. So I asked my sister-in-law to view the property on our behalf, and it looked perfect. It was a rental, but essentially a pretty big house. It had hardwood floors and it was on a quiet little street. The rent was really cheap compared to Yokohama, and there were mountains just behind the house, as well as a stream. I decided that it would be the perfect environment to raise our children. I imagined them growing a rich interest in nature. We were so happy to move, and it turned out to be exactly how we had hoped. My husband and I were in love with the house. When we met the neighbors, I was pleasantly surprised to hear that they had migrated from Yokohama, just like we had, so we had plenty to talk about. They also had children the same sort of age as ours, so we quickly became very friendly with our neighbors. This was most welcome, as it did take some time to get acclimated. I felt like we didn't really fit in with the people who lived in the countryside. It was a bit cliquey. We moved in during late summer and things went really well. Nothing much really happened, but a few months later snow began to fall. One day it started snowing during the day, and by the time we had finished dinner, I looked outside at our garden and there was about 5 cm of fresh snow. I gave my kids a bath and got them into their beds, and I headed back downstairs to join my husband in the living room, and that was when we first heard it. I heard this strange animal owl-like growling sound, and it sounded like it was coming from outside, somewhere close by where we were sitting in the living room. I could hear that growling sound so clearly even when the TV was on and all the windows were shut. My husband could hear it too. We both looked at one another in silence. We paused the TV to listen a little more clearly. The growl was very deep and powerful. I started to wonder if it was a wild dog or a bear. Those thoughts frightened me, because if there was some big animal out there, it could easily try and smash its way into our home if it smelt something it wanted. I went into protection mode. I readied myself. I grabbed my phone just in case and I held it tightly. We sat there listening to that low owl growling, and then it changed as if it started to attack something. We then heard a really loud, high-pitched scream. My husband jumped to his feet. He left the room and returned with a flashlight in his hand. He said, "Come on, let's look from the window upstairs." We crept into my eldest son's bedroom to look out of his window as it faced the direction. We heard the growls and screams coming from, and my husband shot his flashlight outside. It was as if those growls and screams were in unison, like it was one creature making these varied screams and growls. It was very unnerving. We squinted and looked everywhere but couldn't see anything. My eldest son was awake. He must have heard those bestial growls and woken up. He was pulling the covers up to just beneath his eyes and he looked scared. We could hear the screams and growls outside rising, so we tried to see if we could see anyone or anything out there, but once again we couldn't see a thing. My husband said he was going out to check it out and I desperately tried to stop him. We ended up having a bit of a heated argument while we were arguing. All the strange and frightening noises coming from outside suddenly stopped the following morning when I woke up. I went to look outside to see if there were any signs of anything out there. I don't know what I was expecting to find, maybe some footprints, but there wasn't anything, just pure white snow. I spent most of the day thinking about the night before his events. I ended up being so curious about it. I went to ask my neighbor if he had heard or seen anything last night, since he had been living there for 2 more years than we had. I figured that if this had happened before, he might be able to tell me a little more about whatever it was. I will call my neighbor Mr. Mr. said that he had heard the same roaring noises that we had before. The first time he heard it, he thought that it could have been a bear, so he called the police. This was at about 11 p.m. roughly around the same time we had heard it last night. Police officers came out with some rangers. I don't know what they're called it, but maybe animal control is a closer word. They came out and searched the area but found nothing. Mr. made a report, but nothing much happened beyond that. He said that he had heard a lot of different voices all intertwining at once, and that kind of made sense to me. When I thought back to what I heard, I would say that was similar. It was like a massive raucous shouting, growling, screaming noise, kind of like a crowd or maybe a riot. Mr. said that he thought that it was very strange that he couldn't find a trace of anyone. After all that noise he had heard, it had played on his mind, just like it had played on mine. He said, come to think of it now, it was snowing. That day too. He had this kind of surprised look on his face. He went on to say that he wasn't satisfied by the inaction of the local police, so he decided to head out and search for any traces in the snow himself. He couldn't find anything of interest, so he just went home confused and creeped out. The following day he went to visit his landlord, but before he even got there, word had already reached his landlord's ears that there had been an incident the night before. His landlord was a woman in her 90s and she owned a lot of land in the area. Basically the whole street. Our house too. The information exchange in the countryside is honestly terrifying. The policeman was probably the one who told Mr. Ray's landlord she knew exactly what he had come to ask her about. He comes down the mountains every now and then. Don't pay it much mind. It's like a god. And Mr. said that he wasn't buying that and he didn't like the way she was so dismissive of what he had heard. The stubborn old landlady wouldn't budge. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. She said there's nothing we can do about it. It's a local thing. If you don't like it, leave. That's fine by me. It means you no harm. You can't do anything about it, so don't let it bother you. Mr. Ray's story was very intriguing and it reminded me of the first time I walked around our new area. I took a walk with my children. We wanted to get our bearings and get used to our new surroundings. So as you go up the mountain pass, you are first struck with the number of old graves and crumbling statues. There were these tall old trees with ropes attached to them. It was like it belonged to another era. We met our landlord out there, who happened to be the same landlord as Mr. I remembered what she said to me and my family: don't go too far. You'll get lost. I found that warning a little odd because it wasn't a particularly big mountain range. I have hiked bigger with my family. I figured you could be up and down that mountain within a couple of hours, so I didn't understand why she thought that we could get lost there. I told Mr. about the encounter and wondered out loud if it was related to his experience. And he said, oh, of course I had been up in that mountain there and there is a shrine at the top of. It's pretty creepy. He said this with that strange RY smile on his face again. I didn't know that there was a shrine out there behind my house. I was surprised and a bit more spooked out by my new town. It's not just that mad chorus of voices and screams we heard. You have to worry about. Mr. said almost all of the houses on our street have the same layout. All the doors are these sliding frosted glass doors. We both said how much we didn't like those doors, but because they gave us no privacy. So we had both put up a curtain rod with curtains so people couldn't look from the outside. Also, each house had a skylight and we spoke about how it was a little odd. Mr. said that he really didn't like his. He said that he had seen strange shadows dancing across it during the twilight hours. He said that he saw shadows moving around outside the frosted glass front door as well. The skylight was so high up it was really weird to hear that he had seen some shadows out there. I think he was implying that they were not passing clouds but something living or something else. Mr. said that he noticed something about when the shadows came to visit him. When they came to his door, he would find dead things there in the morning. There would be a pile of dead centipedes and some dead birds just neatly lined up on his doorstep. It didn't feel as if they died there. Naturally to him, despite all of those weird goings on, Mr. seemed content to live there. It was mind-boggling to me. I was mentally packing our suitcases. He had that smile on his face again as he told me that it was like he was enjoying these nasty experiences with me. And I didn't like it. I went home frightened in all honesty. I ordered some new curtains online, as well as one for the skylight. Thanks to those thick new curtains, I didn't see any of the shadows that Mr. mentioned. I did, however, find some dead animals in our back garden. Some dead snakes and some dead birds were there. I couldn't say it was a coincidence. I wondered if the shadows Mr. had mentioned had paid our family home a visit. Things got even weirder when my children would talk about the mountain behind our home. They would say things like, "Mom, look, there's a ghost on the mountain. I could see her." My eldest son would often play with Mr. Ray's daughter, and he told me that she said to him once that something had come down from the mountain and had tried to take her away. It was all getting seriously scary. Things seemed to be going really badly for us. My relationship with my in-laws became so incredibly strained that I felt as if we needed to leave. Thankfully, my husband wasn't having much luck in his new job either, so he was happy to agree to go back to Yokohama. We had both been suffering in silence. We should have said how we felt to one another sooner. Since moving back to Yokohama, I have kept in touch with Mr. He still lives out there in Ahoku, and sometimes he lets me know when something creepy has happened in the area. He said he is waiting for his daughter to get to high school age and then they'll move out. It was such a weird experience. I can hardly believe it happens sometimes. I think that landlord lady knows something. I don't feel like digging any deeper. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I don't want to see dead animals outside my door in Yokohama. I decided to put curtains up in our new place. Just in case I'll take them down when I'm ready. Thanks for listening to my story. Sorry, I don't have much for you in terms of a conclusion. I first noticed it just after Halloween, just at the cusp of winter. This was last year. Of course, it was the strangest thing. It actually creeped me out. At around 1:30 in the morning, I heard someone trying our door. It was coming from our front door. It wasn't gentle. By the way, it was jarring enough to wake me and my partner up. It was scary to hear a noise like that in the middle of the night, but we both tried to be logical. I remember sitting up in bed in the dark and asking my partner, was that the wind? It was weird, but as the noise went away we kind of stopped caring about it. We thought it could have been a drunk neighbor trying the wrong house or something. A couple of weeks go by and we were about midway through November and I hear someone trying the door again. Only this time I was awake. I was watching something on my phone in the bathroom, so I pressed pause on that, took out the headphones and I checked the time and it was around 2:30 am. Just like last time. I went straight to the door and then I just had this really weird feeling as I approached the door. I planned on throwing the door open and giving whoever was behind it a piece of my mind, but something inside me screamed no. Don't do that. I did, however, summon the courage to look through the peephole. I expected to see some pranks a kid, but there was actually no one out there. There was nothing but snow falling, and the gaps in my door did that noise you can always hear when it's cold and windy out. It's kind of like this ominous moaning sound. I didn't like it. I've never liked it. I had to back away from the door, so enough was enough. At that point I spoke about it with my husband, and we made a plan to stay up late to see if we could catch whoever was messing with us in the act. Because this was happening way too frequently to be some kind of coincidence or mistake. He really didn't want to do it, to be honest, as he had work early in the morning. But this was important to me. So we sat on the stairs, glaring at the front door from about 2:20 onwards. About 10 minutes later, and then the inevitable happened. Someone tried to open our door. My husband raced to the door. He put his eye to the peephole. He turned back my way and whispered that there was no one out there. My husband did say that he felt something there. I guess it was similar to the feelings that I had felt when I went to the door. only he phrased it a little differently. He said that he felt a bad feeling. He said he felt that something was trying to enter the house, and that really stayed with me. I guess that was because of the way he phrased it. Something was trying to enter the house. He then said, if we hear this noise again, let's not open the door. I'll simplify it. We both decided to leave things alone. I mean, each time we checked there was no one there. So we thought there wasn't much to worry about. Right, weeks went by. The doorknob continued to rattle. But my husband and I didn't care about it that much as we had bigger things to worry about. I started to feel really bad towards the end of November. I started to feel unwell and continued to feel that way when the new year rolled around and right up until early February. I went to the doctor for an examination, and during the pelvic exam his face changed. Tests were conducted and they found out I had cancer. 2 days after the appointment I was transferred to the hospital in the city. Tests and surgery came next and they were very successful. I was in the hospital for about a month, maybe a month and a half. But after that I was able to go home. I had been so preoccupied and frankly scared while I was in the hospital that I forgot all that door stuff going on at home. So when I got home I asked my husband if he had heard anything while I was in the hospital. He was honest and said he had completely forgotten about all that stuff too. He was in the hospital most nights and days with me. I don't know why I thought he would have an update for me on the door stuff. He did say that he was up most nights after leaving me in the ward. He found it hard to sleep. He said, on average he was up until about 3 a.m. During that time no one tried the door. Well, at least that was good. One quiet evening while we were clearing out plates after dinner, he said something that will always stay with me. You know, I think whoever was trying the door might have been the Grim Reaper. Now this was very jarring because my husband wasn't the type to get scared easily or even be superstitious. So naturally his comments took me aback. I really don't want you to open the door if we ever hear anything like that again. So that thought has never left me. And I also consider myself incredibly lucky to be here. I mean, ghost stories and home intruder stories are really scary. But what I experienced really was a level higher than that to me. What might have happened if I opened that door? Would things have gone differently? Would I still be here? I get the sense that things might have played out differently. My husband believes that we would have let something in and I might not have made it out of hospital if we did. Hello everyone. Today I will tell you a horror story from the city, from the personal experience of netizens. I don't know if there are many people out there who can say that they wish that they were in another world. I know this world can be a pretty crappy place sometimes, but if you had the chance to enter another reality, would it be worth risking it? It's kind of like rolling the dice. You might be on a 4 out of 6 at the moment, but you could gamble that and land on one. But hey, you might strike it lucky and land on a 6. Consider yourself warned as we move into what could be possible. Are you tired of the real world? Is stress getting you down? I might have a solution for you if you're willing to roll that dice. What do you say? You might not be able to come back from this. It's dangerous. But hey, by now you know the risk. Have you ever heard of the elevator game or the elevator to another world? It was once posted on the occult board in Chan back in the day. It's a mysterious little gamble which offers you the possibility of getting off the elevator in a different plane of reality. It kind of makes sense. I guess those moments when you ride an elevator are kind of strange, aren't they? Your body feels like it's floating away. You get a small sense of thrill. You know, if there was a way to get off at another plane of life, well hey, that might be worth checking out, right? If it works or not, that's another story. But let's see what we have to do to make it happen first before we pass judgment. Well, the first thing you need to do, if you really want to give this a try, is find a building with 10 floors. Yeah, that's where you start. First, you have to get in the elevator at the ground floor. Oh, and you have to do this alone. There's an order to this. You have to do this right if you want it to work. And it goes like this: go to the 4th floor and then the 2nd floor. Next is the 6th floor. Back down to the 2nd floor and finally the 10th floor. There is one small hitch. Though someone boards the elevator during this process, it effectively voids your trip. Put plainly, the game is off. No trip to another world for you. But what happens if everything goes to plan well? If you follow the instructions, then you will find yourself at the 10th floor without any companions in the elevator with you. If you've gotten that far, then the next steps are crucial. So from the 10th floor, you'll want to hit the button for the 5th floor. Next, it is at this point that your solo voyage will end. You'll be joined by a woman. Under no circumstances should you speak to her. The reason for this isn't exactly clear, but trust me, it's good advice. Now that you are joined by that mysterious woman, you should hit the button for the 1st floor. This is the point where the elevator will start to behave strangely or glitch out, for want of a better phrase. Press the button for the 1st floor, but suddenly the elevator disobeys you and heads to the 10th floor. As you watch the floor numbers raise to 10, you should be aware that this is your last chance to get off. As pressing a button for any random floor between your current floor, floor 10, will interrupt the elevator game. Should you choose to ride all the way to the top, another world awaits. Think about it. As soon as you pass that 9th floor, there's no going back. Excitement and fear is welling in the pit of your stomach. But before we go further, I want to say that there is a way to do this in a 3-story building. Apparently, the same rules apply if someone gets on. The game's over. If you get the order wrong, the game is over. But there's one crucial difference. This happened when I was in the 1st or 2nd year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. You don't have to be alone this time. Okay, let's go over the way to do this. When you get in, hit the button for the 3rd floor and just keep hitting the door close button and wait for the doors to close. Now this part is key. Just before the doors close, hit the door open button and quickly take your finger off the button. Then just as quickly hit the door close button. The aim here is to cancel the ride to the 3rd floor as quickly as possible. I know it's a bit complex, but we're trying to escape our own realities here. From this point, you have to hit the following commands in quick succession: 3rd floor, 1st floor, 2nd floor, 1st floor, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, 1st floor, and finally 3rd floor. Don't cancel or anything. Just ride it to the 3rd floor once again. If someone gets in, it's over. Now when you're at the 3rd floor, don't get off. Just stay in there and press the button for the 1st floor and then the 2nd floor. If you arrive at the 2nd floor, some people say that someone might get on in this 3-story building version. It's not known who will get on. Some say a man gets on and some say a woman gets on. Either way, don't talk to them. Under any circumstances, the elevator will disobey you once someone gets on. Some say this person is your guide. When you arrive in an alternate reality, next hit the 1st floor button. Like in the 10th floor version, the elevator will disobey your command and head towards the 3rd floor once again. If you want to stop and get off, you better do it before the elevator arrives at the 3rd floor. Because once you get off at the 3rd floor, you'll be in another plane of reality. By the way, there's a way to go back. If you remember how to do this in reverse. Can you remember? Because I don't think I can bring myself to list those floor numbers again. I know it might seem a little out there, but posters on the channel have documented their experiences. According to those who have tried it and have been successful, they arrive in an alternate reality, a new world. There is an immediate sense of something uncanny. As they disembark, some say the world appears to be in a bright shade of red. This one guy said he was so overwhelmed by what he saw when he got off the elevator that he tried to reverse the process when he frantically hit the button for the 1st floor. It took a while for the elevator to get moving, But when it did, he said that he felt a sudden wave of relief wash over him. The elevator stopped halfway and then someone got on. A man who he described as an office worker got on, and without missing a beat, the office worker turned to the guy and said, "Seeing a lot. Are you okay?" Another weird thing that others have commented on is if you tried to take a photo while playing the elevator game. There is this kind of infamous post about it. Actually, someone posted a photo and it's no longer available forever, fueling the mystery behind playing the elevator game. The post no longer exists and I've looked for it. It's like nothing is able to be documented while playing this game. I don't know if that's changed nowadays. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Well, at this point we have arrived at the question of the possibilities of playing the elevator game. What is the ultimate reality? Like the paranormal world, the other world. Apparently it isn't as wonderful as we would hope for. It doesn't sound like it's worth the risk. But hey, like I told you at this time, if you're tired of this world, maybe you want to roll that dice. I don't know if you should trust me. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Perhaps my words are the equivalent to the Venus flyrat. I'm just trying to offer you something pretty sweet. Some envision the other world filled with gallant knights and elves, like a medieval fantasy or something like that. Maybe it's a trip to the past, full of the construction of beautiful churches, or the Wild West. In any case, the outcome we hope for is surely different from our own. I think that's why this urban legend became so appealing. The possibilities appear to be limitless. It's interesting to me that the elevator is the travel method. So let's just touch on why an elevator might be important or significant, especially in Japan. Well, an elevator is a private sort of place, isn't it? It's not that dissimilar to a cubicle or a coffin or any enclosed space like that. It's one of the only vehicles you use for travel that you don't have total control over. Do you remember, when you were a kid, it was all kind of fun to press all those buttons, wasn't it? Well, elevators are an integral part of the Japanese building structure. I think that might be down to the way they build upwards instead of outwards. The structural integrity of blocks. The flats or apartments have been built on the foundations of earthquake prevention. It may seem like an oxymoron, but the taller buildings are the safer they are in some cases. So growing up as a kid there must be full of elevator rides at one point or another. Imagine how many elevators there are in Tokyo. My office has an elevator, and every time I ride it I feel I don't know a sense of excitement or thrill. Somehow the fact that an earthquake could change everything for me. Well, sim first, that feels like a risk. A little gamble. Even the elevator game is complex and honestly very difficult to execute without someone entering the elevator. The elevator game sure is interesting. Although I think it should be renamed, as I wish I could go to another world game. It's complex and you might fail when you attempt and get disheartened. You might think to yourself, I must have hit the wrong button. But deep down there might be something inside that tells you it's possible. Do you want to? Do you want to go off in the red world? The medieval world or another world? What if you can't come back? Sometimes, when I ride an elevator and someone looks at me just as I get in, I sometimes think, I just interrupted that game. Didn't I should? I feel embarrassed or scared. I don't know. Is it real? I mean, come on. Could it be real? Let's be honest here. Let's be real. If we leave behind discussions of fantasies and you give the elevator game a try, you press all the right buttons in the right order and no one gets on. When you get off at the final stop, will you be in another world? Maybe. Hey, maybe it just looks the same as everyday life. The doors open and you just see yourself in the same building that you know quite well. It's just another day. Right. But is it? Maybe it's different and you just haven't seen how different it is here. Oh damn. It didn't work. You might think to yourself. You might even smirk and claim it's. But look carefully. People say it's never the same. Once they've played the game successfully, little by little changes in your everyday life emerge. It might be small at first, but participants of the elevator games say the results are there. You're somewhere else, even though it looks the same somewhere. Maybe your friends and family bawling their eyes out while they post missing person posters and search for you. Hey, good luck out there, if you feel like rolling that dice. This is a popular urban legend which can be found in many different formats. We will take a look at some variations in a little bit. But first I want to share the urban legend itself. This is just one supposed true account of an interaction with the Tomorrow's Victims broadcast. I used to be into late night radio. I'm not into it so much these days. I had a favorite show that I would religiously tune into. I usually just listened to my radio show and then kind of drifted off to sleep in bed when it finished. But one night I stayed up a little later than usual. I was messing around with the radio, trying to tune it into another radio station. I didn't really have a station in mind. I was just looking around. I don't know why. Maybe I had some trouble sleeping anyways. That's not important. As I searched, I heard little bursts of static coming from the radio, and that told me that I had found a live station. I fine-tuned until the static cleared and a voice came through. I wondered what kind of show I was going to listen to. It was strange and it didn't seem all that entertaining. At first it just seemed like it was a monotone voice reading a list of names. It just kept going and going. The name seemed unfamiliar to me, but there was a celebrity's name that I recognized. After a minute or so the voice stopped and then it said, "These are tomorrow's victims," and with that the radio fell silent. I lay in bed thinking about. It was really strange. I eventually fell asleep. The following night I tuned into my regular radio show, and during that show there was a news break and the news stated that a celebrity had passed away, and that celebrity was the one I heard on that strange broadcast the night before. It was seriously weird. Could it be true? Did I find some kind of weird Grim Reaper-like list last night? I have tried and tried to find that station again, but every time I fail. Tomorrow's Victim is a famous urban legend from Japan. In some versions the radio is replaced by a TV. In the TV version, people say that they have seen names appear on the screen on channels which should show nothing but static. Since digital media has replaced analog media, the static radio and TV channels are harder and harder to come by because these channels are no longer accessible. This urban legend has kind of been buried and forgotten. There have been reports of some internet videos that resemble Tomorrow's Victims, but not that many. Some say that it's a conspiracy theory. Some kind of Illuminati influence, some unseen shadowy organization supposedly decides whose names belong on the list of Tomorrow's Victims for it. I'm sure that some of you have heard this one before. I sure have. But I've translated roughly 30 words in the hope that we'll discover something new here. Timestamps will be in the description. If you feel like skipping this one, please go ahead. But I think by the end of it you might have heard a fresh take on this classic, based on information from the source language. Tikateki is an urban legend that originates from Japan. It surfaced and spread by word of mouth from the 80s and into the 90s. Even to this day, you can still hear it referenced in popular culture and find videos here on YouTube about. It is an apparition, a spirit of a high school girl. The way this high school girl appears is without the lower half of her body. It is said that she lost the lower half of her body through a terrible accident, since she doesn't have legs. It is said that she travels by crawling along the floor with her arms, hands and elbows. Teka-teka is an onomatopoeia word that comes from the sound of walking on your hands and elbows. Tikite became socially popular and relevant that it transcended from just being an urban legend. It has spawned further ghost stories, had mangas and movies dedicated to it, and Teka-teki is sometimes considered a yokai. So what does Kite do? It visits schools and is said to chase students who gaze upon it at terrifying speeds. The gender of Tike is predominantly described as female, but there are few accounts of this legend where Tike is male. Sometimes it is said to be able to travel through the air, but it is always said to be carrying CFES. As with many urban legends, there are several variations to the story. Sometimes Kite is identified in other stories, such as Kashima-san, the structure of telling. The orbital engine usually goes like this. The teller reveals the reason why Aki became a vengeful spirit and then ends the story by stating that Teki will appear to anyone who has heard the urban legend within a certain time period in an attempt at ramping up the fear of the story. So with that, let's tell the story. I'll act as a teller and you can be the listener. Let's get started. The setting is a Japanese high school. A high school boy leaves school a little after his final class. The school is already almost empty. He turns back to see a really pretty high school girl through her ground floor window of a classroom. She's looking his way with her arms folded. He had never seen her before, and due to how pretty he thought she was, he was certain that he would have remembered her. He guessed that she must be new to the school, maybe some kind of transfer student. Their eyes met and the girl smiled at him. It was at this point he realized that something was very wrong. It looked as if she didn't have the lower half of her body. The moment he realized this, she leapt out the window and came at him. It was so shocking that he felt as if he was frozen in place. The girl with nothing below her torso came, rushing at him on her hands and elbows at tremendous speed. The speed and method she traveled with made an eerie sound too. Tucker came at him and cut him down with her weapons. She chose the Sith too. In fact, she rendered him in the same state that she was membered, and within 3 days she will come. For anyone who hears this story, even if you run, she'll still find you, and don't you dare believe you'll get away. She's much too fast for you. Beware when you hear the sound of some rumors. State that if you say Teki 3 times, that it will come for you. Can you imagine how much trouble I'm in now? So who is Tiki and what happened to her? According to the most prominent rumor, the urban legend was born in Hokkaido. One winter's night, a tragic accident occurred at a railway crossing in Madoan. A high school girl was run down by a train. I've read that in different prefectures, elements of this story differ. For example, in Omori Prefecture, she was hit by a snowplow. Anyway, the high school girl's upper body was separated from her lower body by the speed and weight of the train, giving her the tragic appearance that she is known for. Police officers and forensic teams arrived after someone reported her death. It was thought that the poor girl died instantly, but she didn't. The police and the forensics teams had the unenviable task of collecting her scattered body parts, her feet, her shins, her thighs, all of the lower body parts. When they approached the upper part of her body, they heard a faint voice call out, which means help in Japanese, help me, and also incorporates the tikitikonometapeshi we spoke about earlier. They were shocked and thought that somehow she must have miraculously survived, even though she was surely dead. I mean, there was so much blood. Their surprise turned to pure horror when they saw the girl climb herself along the ice, covered ground by her hands and elbows. It had been reported that she was dead. She couldn't possibly be alive. The impact was clearly fatal. I mean, there was almost no chance of survival. And if there was the slimmest of chances, winter in Hokkaido, freezing cold, would have surely sped up her demise. But against all odds, she appeared to have survived. Let's get there. Her voice was getting weaker and weaker. Since there was no ambulance at the scene, the officers and the forensic team made a pact. They said that there was nothing they could do at this point, so they agreed to leave her. They covered her with a plastic sheet as she murmured for help and slowly succumbed to her injuries in the biting cold. It is said that her spirit still lingers the earth looking for her missing lower body parts, hate-filled and envious of those who have theirs. So if Tiki comes for you, how do you deal with her? So we know that within 3 days she's gonna be after you. and I wouldn't be much help if I ended the video here. So let me share with you a method of how you can protect yourself. Contrary to a terrifying speed, the fact that she's missing the lower half of her body, she apparently has a pretty cute face, and they say that makes her even more terrifying. So remember, if she comes to you, it's recommended that you chant back at her. Go to hell or go back to hell. Then you'll be able to run away from her. This only stalls her momentarily, so you better seize that opportunity to get the hell out. Teki is also known by other names. Ghosts, which appear without the lower half of their body in Japan, have also been known in other stories, and she's also sometimes known as kon, which is the onomatopoeia word for knocking. Also parapara, which is the descriptive word for the sound of elbows hitting against the ground. The Japanese really love their onomatopoeia words. Other visual descriptions state that when Teki travels along the ground, her internal organs follow behind her, which makes her appearance all that more terrifying. In my opinion, a similar urban legend which originates from Hokkaido is that of Sacha. Again, it takes place in Muran, Hokkaido, and it goes something like this. Sachiko Kiridan, a 14-year-old high school student, was on her way home from school. She crossed the railway tracks at the crossing to get home. Like always, but this time it was different. Her foot got stuck between the tracks somehow, and she was unable to move. As she tried to free herself from the tracks, she heard the roll of the oncoming train to late. By then, the train hit her leg and jerked her lower half of her body from her upper half. She was exposed to a particularly freezing Hokkaido winter, so her blood vessels and organs constricted, temporarily stopping her bleeding. She arrived in excruciating pain for several minutes, crawling around for help before perishing alone in the dark and cold. A student of the same school was said to have found this particularly amusing somehow, and he gave her the name Sochan. Sachiko becomes Sochan when you kind of consider that she could be a friend. You know, like a J-chan. Don't call me now. So this kid spread the story around the school. He was found dead shortly after having suffered the same fate as Sachiko did. He died alone in his bedroom through blood loss, and to this day the lower half of his body has never been found. Others say that Teki is true. Identity was Kashimuriko, and that is a whole nother story for another collection. In most depictions, Teki will carry a scythe to render the victim with the same fatal wounds as she suffered. She makes them endure the hell she had to by killing them in such a way that mimics her own disfigurement. In 2009, a movie was made which spawned a sequel, which was released on the same day. So everyone just be careful and cautious over the next 3 days and listen out for anything that sounds like the oncoming rushing of hands or elbows along the floor. For a legend dates back to 1955 or the year 30 of the show-up period. Have you ever seen this sign before? If you've ever been to Japan or watched any Japanese movies or TV shows, you might recognize it. Apparently there was an announcement that the government was going to create a new pedestrian crossing sign, and they decided to involve the public with this project. They set up a campaign and shared it with the public, asking for photo submissions for a new pedestrian sign. Then they would pick a photo to base the design for the sign on. The aim wasn't to make a sign using a photo, but to use the subjects in the photo or illustrations to design an easy-to-understand sign. Came in from all areas of the country. There were hundreds of illustrations and photos. Among those submissions was a photo from a man who was only known as Mr. Mr. was a photographer who lived in Kyushu Prefecture, and this photo was selected to be the basis for the pedestrian sign. His photo was of a father and his daughter walking hand in hand. Once again, if you look at the screen now, you will see a finalized street sign. And perhaps from this you can get a sense or imagine what Mr. A's photo would have like. That photo became the street sign that we still see today. However, little did Mr. know his camera had caught something sinister. The father and daughter walking hand in hand weren't as they seemed. On the day Mr. heard about the contest for the new pedestrian sign, he raced out with his camera to the streets, He searched for the perfect subject for his shot, and that was when he saw a father leading his daughter by the hand exiting a park, seeing them walking together. Mr. seized the opportunity and took the winning photo. He was very proud of his shot. He felt that he had naturally captured a lovely father-daughter moment. A few days after he submitted the photo, he was watching the news and he was shocked to hear of a horrifying local crime. There had been a kidnapping and a murder. The face of the killer and the victim was shown on screen. While he watched the news report, Mr. was filled with a sense of déjà vu. He thought their faces seemed somewhat familiar. He couldn't quite place where he had recognized them from, but then he remembered the photo he had taken for the competition. What Mr. thought was a photo of her father and daughter was actually a photo of a kidnapper and his victim. That girl died the day after his photo was taken. He later received a letter to state that his touching photo of a father and his daughter had been chosen to win the competition. It was too late to go back. The signs we see today were already in mass production by the time he received his letter. So the next time you see this sign, I hope you take a closer look at it. Things aren't always what they seem. Thank you for it. Today's story ends. I wonder if you feel creepy. If you are interested in horror stories, welcome to subscribe to us. See you next time. Hello everyone. Today I will tell you 6 horror stories from netizens' experiences, from netizens' submissions. And what I'll do is I'll pick the best 5 or 6 or 7 and we'll put it in a video. So please like, share, subscribe, and here's the bells. This happened when I was having a quiet night in. It was kind of late and I was just lounging on the couch. My dog had hopped up onto the couch with me and was sleeping with his head on my belly. I remembered that I was watching some Major League Baseball game marathon, and it felt like it was going on forever. I was really drowsy and I was nodding off at points. Suddenly the dog jumped off of me, and down to the floor he stared at the frosted door that leads to the hallway. I asked my dog, "What's wrong, boy?" But he wouldn't even look my way. He was completely fixated on that door. I sat up and I looked at his face. He was baring his teeth. I've never seen him do that before. He was always such a placid little guy. My dog was beginning to worry me. Now my worries increased when I heard him let out a very low, deep sustained growl. This was so odd because, like I said, I hadn't ever seen this kind of behavior from my dog before. His fur was up and he had taken this aggressive, forward-leaning stance. I decided to turn my attention to the lounge door. I wanted to figure out what my dog was growling at. I couldn't believe what I saw. There was a dark silhouette behind the frosted glass and was doing this very strange and creepy swaying movement. It was like it was coming closer to the door and then retreating backwards, like it was trying to decide whether to try to come in or not. It was very creepy. I had a stun gun, so I backed over to my backpack, which I had thankfully left in the lounge that night, and I dug it out. I remember hearing myself say something like, "What the hell is this?" out loud. The atmosphere in my house that day seemed so dark and tense. I stood there with my dog, thinking at any moment the door could open or at any moment that shadowy figure could turn and leave. My legs were shaking. I was finding it hard to keep balance, and of course my arms were shaking even more. I just tried my hardest to steady my arm all the while I was still growling at the shadow of some unknown intruder. Then suddenly, just as quick as it began, it was over. The shadow just dissipated. It was like it had disappeared in a puff of smoke. Was it ever really there? I'm pretty sure something was there. The way it disappeared was so strange. It kind of just gradually seeped back into the darkness. I must sound so crazy, but it's true. I swear, that's what I saw. After it left, my dog calmed down and he just went right on back to the couch and lay down as if to say nothing to worry about. Now it was amazing. I'll tell you now. It took a hell of a long time to summon the courage to open that door. But when I did, I found no signs of a break and my door was firmly locked. I even had put the chain on. No one had been in my house. But I definitely saw something, and I know that my dog saw it too. I think I was visited by some kind of spirit, and based on how my dog and I felt when we encountered it, I don't think that it was a particularly friendly spirit. I'm just grateful that my dog picked up on it and was there with me. It was honestly a terrifying experience. I work in the apparel industry, and due to rising costs and declining quality coming out of China, my company decided to develop a new business opportunity to consolidate suppliers in Bangladesh. So I went to visit a supplier in Bangladesh to receive a pitch. I would be there to check the quality, perform some on-site surveys, and just see how things work out there. So this happened when I went to Bangladesh. I was blown away when I got there. Urban areas like Dhaka were so modern and just amazing. They rivaled Tokyo. Having said that, the countryside looked like it was right out of the movie My Neighbor Totoro. By that I mean there were a lot of rural areas without access to sufficient electricity or running water. I was kind of taken aback that their factories were located in an area like that. Let me just get it straight, I don't dislike that kind of environment at all. So, to be honest, I was enjoying looking around. I was discussing things with the employees at the factory, and they were just all so nice. They were very interested in Japan and our way of life, and I have to say that I felt the same about Bangladesh. After a few days into my visit, I was offered to stay in the village with the locals. To be honest, the hotel I was staying in was in a place called Barzil, which was a little a-ways from the factory and the village area. So I thought, why not? I had a rare opportunity to see how the locals lived. Plus, I wouldn't exactly be doing much in my hotel room anyways. The village seemed pretty wealthy. They had an arcade with some really cool PS2 games in. It was great to see those. They had their own version of a convenience store too. One thing I noticed pretty quickly was that it seemed that foreigners were pretty rare for their village. People were crowding around me. It felt like I was some kind of celebrity. By the way, it was just men who crowded around me. I'm also a man. I didn't see any women out and about. I spent the night at Mr. Arad's house. That's a slight pseudonym. By the way, I had a night that I would never forget. He and his family welcomed me in with open arms, and I really enjoyed my time with them. The night grew late and I headed up to the bed they had given me for the night. I was messing around on my laptop at the desk in the bedroom. I think I was playing some game I had downloaded, and I was just about to shut the laptop down to get some sleep when I felt something. I felt the presence of someone in the room with me, not just one person, but many, maybe a dozen. I can't explain it well, but it was kind of like when you're in a movie theater in the dark. There were just people set in silent anticipation, not talking people, just collectively being there. Do you know what I mean? You can feel a presence, and you can sense that there's breathing in the room. Little things like that. The village is completely without power at night. The only light that was on in Mr. Arad's house was the light coming from my laptop. I turned the laptop away from me and kind of waved it around the room to see if the light from my screen revealed anyone in the room with me. But of course no one was there. I was alone in what felt like a room full of presences. Realizing that gave me the tingles. But I told myself that it was all in my mind and I was probably imagining things because I was in some place new. I forced myself to shut my laptop down and the room felt dark. It was time to sleep. I crawled into bed and tried to ignore my own thoughts. I tried as hard as I could, but I couldn't convince myself. I knew that there was something in that room with me, and it was still there. I thought that there was a spirit in the room with me, and I decided to open my eyes to look around, because I had always wanted to see something paranormal. I couldn't see anything. This happened while I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Because it was so dark still, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I don't know if my eyes adjusted to the dark or something, but I saw something that looked like a white horizontal line drawn on the wall. The line was broken in some areas, but it looked like a line. I was just staring at that line that seemed to have appeared out of the dark. It was like these tiny white moving shapes that just arrived and formed a vague line. It was very hard. I don't know why, but when I saw that, I felt very calm. It was soothing to me. I felt relaxed, and before I knew it, I had slipped into a deep, dreamless sleep. The following morning I toyed with the idea of telling Mr. Arad about what happened, but in the end I felt like there was no need to scare him unnecessarily. So I kept quiet. But later I remembered something that Mr. Arad said when I was surrounded by the locals. He said something similar to this: for some of these villagers, you may be the only foreign person that they will ever see, so this is why they are drawn to you. They want to hear your stories and see how you are different from them. Sorry, things are a little different here in comparison to the city. Please forgive them. They don't mean to be rude. So with that in mind, I can't help but wonder if some local spirits or reparations wanted to make contact with me to that night. If that's the case, then it's probably not the worst haunting or paranormal experience anyone could have right to date. It has been my only paranormal experience and I'm fine with that. A few years ago I had a dream that I was in an unfamiliar place. I was in a forest and there was a small river near our house, and then I was asked by a middle-aged couple for help. They called me over and in my dream I thought that they had lost something and needed help finding it. I say that because they were kind of hunched over down by that small river. As I got down there, I saw that they were trying to float a man's body downstream. I was absolutely shocked. Due to the low level of water in the river, the body was only partially submerged and the body seemed to be stuck, and it wasn't moving. Then the man and the woman began to leave, as if they had given up on their horrible task. I was utterly terrified. At that point, I panicked and I regretted coming here at this point. I would like to remind you that this is still a dream, or a nightmare might be more accurate. For a reason unknown to me, I grabbed a bucket. It was like one of those sandcastle buckets you see kids playing with at the seaside. I just started filling this bucket up with water and tipping it on the body to try and dislodge it, so it flows down the river. Then I hear a distant police siren and something inside me snaps and I think, oh my God, I have to report this. And that was the point that I woke up. I was so creeped out by the realism of that dream. I just had to tell my husband about it. I guess I wanted to talk about it because, honestly, it was way scarier than I can do it justice by just writing it down. I told him in as much detail as I could, and there was a lot. I could remember the terrain, where I was stood and what that middle-aged couple looked like. I mean, I could tell you where bushes and rocks were by that on. It's like I have a photo of it in my mind. I even drew a picture of it for my husband, but I'm no artist. We talked it over and we both ended up laughing at the level of detail my mind had conjured up. It relieved me, to be honest, because I woke up feeling as if I was an accessory to a crime. I had this strange, lingering sense of guilt, as if I was hiding a murder. So about a month ago I was watching the news with my husband and we saw a report of a murder. A middle-aged man and woman had killed a man and his body had been found half submerged in a river. Sounds familiar, right? Well, in the report I saw the exact same angle by the river I had seen in my dream. The scenery was exactly the same. I clasped my hand to my mouth in shock. The river was just the same as it had been in my dream. It was shallow and narrow. And then they cut to the suspect's house, which looked exactly like the house in my dream. What shocked me the most was seeing an item on the step outside of their house. It was the sandcastle bucket I had used to try and dislodge the body with in my dream. Of course, in the news report they even said that there had been an attempt to float the body down the river by the suspects, but they said that those suspects must have given up at some point. The newsreader suggested that they may have been disturbed or spotted during the act and that could have scared them off. The appearance of those two suspects came next and they looked just as they had in my dream. It was around that point my husband murmured, "Isn't this like that dream you had?" It was hard to ignore the similarities between the dream and the news report. It was just all so overwhelming. It was like with each coming sentence from the newsreader's mouth, the more my anxiety grew. I felt as if I was involved because I had seen it all before. There were too many intricate details for it not to be even remotely considered a coincidence. My husband and I talk about it now, and then little things just remind me of it. Or he will sometimes come to me with a question about it. By the way, the real crime that was committed happened in a part of the country that I've never before. Miles and miles and miles away from me. Last summer, I went out with a friend of mine for a drive. We wanted to go someplace scary. We were always trying to find someplace that might be haunted. Well, we went to a couple of places, but nothing really of note happened. It was pretty dull, to be fair. I thought of a place we could go, though our local ski resort was closed as it was summer, and I thought it would be fun to go up there while it was empty. The ski resort was way up in the mountains, and we had drove through some long winding roads to get there. We pulled into the parking lot, which was surprisingly not behind a locked gate, and we parked up when we got there. We didn't really know what to do, to be honest, but then I had an idea. I came up with a game we could play. I'm not really proud of my game, and I don't think anyone out there should try it, because it's dumb and it could have got us or someone really hurt. My game consisted of turning off the lights in the car and driving around the huge parking lot. Although it was night and pretty dark, the moon was full and bright, but that doesn't make it okay though. But we thought that it would be okay. I have to say that driving around without the lights off is pretty thrilling. I was getting a little carried away. I wanted to scare my friend, so I was going faster doing these crazy skits. My friend got really mad at me at one point, so I figured I'd better stop and turn on the lights. Oh man, I wasn't ready for what I saw. I don't think my explanation can do it justice, but let me try. When I reluctantly turned on the lights, something appeared right in front of my car. There was someone there, not just one person, but 6 or 7. They were stood in different spots of the parking lot. All these figures were stood facing away from the car, and then, as if they reacted to the headlights, they turned to face us. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was so scared I just reacted. Instinctively, I spun the car around and screeched out of the parking lot. I couldn't tell you much about those people. I couldn't describe their clothing or anything like that. But one thing for certain is, I'll never forget how the one closest to the car looked. I saw his face and I knew that he wasn't among the living. I have no idea what the hell that was, and I never drove with the lights out like an idiot again. This happened when I was at school. I finished early that day. I think some after-school class was cancelled or something. I went straight home and I was relaxing in the KO My little sister usually came home at around 3 p.m., but it seemed like she must have gone out to play with some of her friends. Both my parents were at work, so I had the whole house to myself. It was amazing. I was eating whatever I wanted and also watching whatever I wanted on TV. I got so comfortable that I almost fell asleep. Some boring show aimed at older women came on TV and I couldn't be bothered to change the channel, so I ended up falling asleep. Then suddenly I was jolted back awake. I heard a sound. It sounded like something heavy. It just moved upstairs. I had heard my parents talking to a bunch of people in the neighborhood about break-ins and robberies in our area, so naturally I thought, oh God, they finally come to our house. I was about 16 at the time and I was in the baseball team. I knew I had a good swing and a bat in the hallway, so I chose to do something reckless. I grabbed my bat and I ran upstairs. I looked around, but I couldn't see anyone up there. I guess that I was so sleepy that I might have been imagining things, or maybe even dreaming. So I went back downstairs and back under the KO. I think about 5 minutes went by and I heard the sound again, and I knew this time that it wasn't my imagination. I felt scared. I felt this way because when I came back downstairs after checking, I locked the front door. I checked the back door, it was locked too. I wanted to check the locks because I got myself all paranoid about these ideas of burglars. Now I knew that the only way someone was going to get into our house would be through a window. And since the whole area was on high alerts because there had been break-ins, I didn't think that robbers would be so dumb enough to try to smash an upstairs window to get into a house. Plus I didn't hear a smash. I heard what sounded like something heavy being moved. So if it wasn't a burglar, then what the hell was up there? I wondered to myself. I knew that my sister hadn't come back yet, and the same went for my parents. The front door hadn't been opened. I was still home alone, although I suddenly didn't feel all that alone. I was scared, but I picked up my bat and I started for the stairs again. I slowly climbed them. This time a part of my bravado had wilted. I could still hear some movements up there. I was able to pinpoint the sound. It was definitely coming from my sister's bedroom. As I got near the top of the stairs, the sound stopped. The house was silent. I had thought about going back downstairs and running out of the house, but I pushed forward. I think my curiosity had outfought my fear. The door to my sister's bedroom was open, and before I could even enter the room, I saw something shocking. If you were to go into my sister's room on any given day, you would have seen her desk against the wall on the left as you had her bed off to the right, alongside her bookcase and the chest of drawers. But not that day. All the big things in her room had been moved. It was completely different to the last time I saw. It looked like it had been all shoved into the corner of her room, where the door to her wardrobe was. I know kids change their rooms all the time, right? Well, my job most mornings is to wake up my sister for school. So I saw the layout of that room that morning since I was the first one home. I was shocked by what I was staring at. I just couldn't believe it. Our house had always been a bit spooky. I mean, we heard some noises coming from upstairs before, but our parents had always told us that it was nothing to worry about. We had never come home to find furniture moved around though. I mean, it sounds weird saying this, but I would have preferred to have gone up there and seen whatever had moved all her stuff, rather than been confronted with nothing. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that I didn't want to be home alone anymore. I had no explanation for why all her stuff was piled up in the corner of her room. I had always wondered why the furniture seemed to be blocking the closet door, but I never found out why. I called a couple of my friends in the neighborhood and asked them if they wanted to hang out, and thankfully they did. We all met up at a nearby convenience store. I would never be the type to believe in experiences like this, but since it actually happened to me, I have no choice but to believe. It was the first time in my life that I realized that there are some things in this world that are completely unknown. This is a terrifying experience. I had at my last apartment a few years ago back, when I was a student. I lived in a rundown apartment because that was all I could afford. It was a nice enough room. Don't get me wrong. It was spacey house and the rent was reasonable too. There was only one thing I couldn't stand about the place. Every night, at about 11 p.m., I heard this strange knocking sound coming from upstairs. At first I thought it was some kind of animal, maybe a cat or something, but because I could always hear that noise at a specific time of night, I put it down to being the work of a human, someone living upstairs. One night, during my 3rd month of living in that place, I decided to go upstairs to complain to the resident in the apartment above mine. However, when I went to speak to the guy, it felt like he knew my complaint was coming, because he said something along the lines of, listen, buddy, the last guy who lived in your place said the exact same thing. I'm not making that noise. Man, it's probably just an animal or something. Okay. I don't think he liked or appreciated the look I must have had on my face, because before I could say anything, he said, I can't hear the noise up here. It's nothing to do with me. All right. And with that he gave me a look of his own. I didn't understand. It didn't seem logical. The noise was coming from the ceiling, and his apartment was directly above mine. How could he not have had something to do with that weird tapping noise at 11 p.m.? However, since I was relatively new to the building, I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt and believe that it might not be him making that noise. His face said it all. "Really?" it said to me. "I've heard this all before. Give me a break." Later that night the noise got louder for the first time. I heard a sound that sounded a little closer to thumping than tapping. I was getting really irritated now, so I grabbed my broom and I just started blasting on the ceiling with the handle in the general direction. The thumping and tapping sounds came from this, so a few more dull taps and thuds. It definitely sounded like something was up there or the neighbor was playing with me. I couldn't tell. Yeah, either way, all of those noises that night creeped me out. Then I felt an eerie chill which made me feel as if I hadn't seen bugs crawling all over my body. It made me shudder above my head. That banging sound continued. It moved in all directions. I wondered if I had rats in the walls, but a part of me doubted that the second I thought of it. The sounds then stopped, as if they had moved into one area of my head. It sounded like it was coming from the top of my closet, and then I suddenly remembered that inside the closet was this small hatch that led to a modest storage area. I wouldn't say it's big enough to call itself an attic, but it was kind of big. Something told me to get out of my apartment that night. I'm big on instincts and a big believer that if you value something, then you'd better listen to it. So that night I went to stay with one of my student friends. The next day, I explained the situation to the landlord and told him that I was considering moving out as I didn't feel right in that apartment anymore. He said he would check it out, but he sounded reluctant. He arrived at my apartment after about 15 minutes. He said that it had been a while since he had been up there in the storage attic area thing, and if I wanted he could set some traps or something if it was a wild animal up there. I told him that the noise was coming regularly before. It was a tapping sound and something that I thought an animal wouldn't be capable of doing. But he kind of shrugged it off as if he'd heard it all before he opened the attic hatch from inside the closet and poked his head up there, but then quickly retracted it. His face was a few shades paler. When he came back out of that attic hatch, he mumbled something and I told him that I couldn't hear what he was saying. And then he repeated himself, "Oh son, you better come with me outside for a minute." With that he made a call and left. He asked me to stay out of my apartment while he was gone. I think about 30 minutes max passed, and then he returned with the police. The police began to question me for a while, but it wasn't a heavy interrogation or anything. It was just one officer who was asking me about how long I lived there, while a couple of others who showed up with him were poking around in that small attic space. The police and the landlord had done a great job of trying to hide what was in the attic from me, because clearly something was going on, but I looked up there myself while I was waiting for him to come back. I couldn't fight my curiosity. I just had to know I saw a skeletal hand up. There were still strands of dead flesh clinging to it, but it had been there for a very long time. I can't help but think that the tapping noises that I heard was someone trying to get my attention. Someone wanting to be found is